Stream on ABC iView.
Good evening, it's Thursday the 12th of May. Here are our top stories. Finland's leaders say the country must join NATO without delay over concerns about Russian aggression. Israel denies its forces were behind the fatal shooting of Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. Papua New Guinea's Deputy Prime Minister Sam Basil dies in a car accident. And Australia awarded rights to host the 2027 and 29 Rugby World Cups. You're watching The World. Hello there, I'm Yvonne Yong. Also tonight, we'll cross live to Turin, where Eurovision hits fever pitch. And can Australia finally win it? Now, Finland's president says the country must apply to join the NATO military alliance without delay. President Sauli Niinisto says he hopes national steps to make this decision will be taken rapidly within the next few days. Finland shares a border with Russia, but until Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, the Nordic country refrained from joining in order to maintain friendly relations with its eastern neighbour. Earlier today, the country's foreign minister said Finland's inclusion would lead to more secure Europe.
There is a widespread loose talk in Russia about the use of unconventional weapons, such as nuclear and chemical weapons, even though the use of such weapons is prohibited by international agreement. Should Finland decide to apply, the accession of Finland would strengthen the security and stability of the Baltic Sea region and Northern Europe. Finland is a regional security provider and would further strengthen NATO as a future ally. From NATO's perspective, Finland holds solid democratic credentials that meet NATO's membership criteria and has a strong and credible national defence that is interoperable with NATO.
Sweden's also expected to decide on joining NATO in the coming days, and we'll have more on this with military strategist Mick Ryan shortly. Meantime, efforts are underway to clear landmines laid by Russian troops as they retreat from the Chernobyl exclusion zone in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin's army destroyed infrastructure and stole property during its occupation of the defunct power plant. But in doing so, troops exposed themselves to potentially dangerous levels of radiation. Europe correspondent Nick Dole reports from Chernobyl.
The drive into Chernobyl was eerie before the war, but now there's a whole new layer of horrors. The gates, once visited by curious tourists, look to be the scene of a firefight. As we drive towards the number 4 reactor, the site of one of the world's worst nuclear incidents, there are more signs of the Russian forces that took up position here. They'd invaded from nearby Belarus and found themselves on a site that they were hopelessly unprepared for. Over here is where some Russian soldiers have dug their trenches. This is highly contaminated land and it shouldn't have been disturbed. It's certainly not safe to go walking in there, but this is where some Russian soldiers have spent days, if not weeks.
These occupying soldiers could have received a high dose of radiation on their bodies, which will give them health problems for the rest of their lives. So their lifespan will depend on how long they have spent in these trenches.
The International Atomic Energy Agency says there's more than 4 times the radiation in the disturbed trenches as there is on nearby ground, but it's still within the safe range. Ukrainian officials say some of the Russians who occupied the facility handled highly radioactive substances during their month-long occupation. But the town of Pripyat, abandoned in the wake of the 1986 disaster, went mostly undisturbed. The famous fairground still sits idle, surrounded by decaying hotels reserved for the guests that will never come. Pripyat would have to be one of the most unlivable places on Earth, so it's perhaps no surprise that Russian soldiers didn't waste much time here. The buildings here are empty shells and there are none of the comforts soldiers might have been looking for. They did take out the mobile phone towers and then they essentially moved on. They were more interested in Chernobyl itself, a town where it's safe enough to live, but only for a couple of weeks at a time. The workers here do shifts while they service the nuclear site. Engineer Alexander Skirta was on duty when the Russians arrived. He says they looted constantly, and what they couldn't take, they seemed determined to break.
We were very worried about what could happen. This is Chernobyl, a nuclear power plant. It's dangerous.
Even in Russia's retreat, the destruction continued. The bridges were blown on the way back to Belarus to stop the Ukrainians giving chase. Whatever radiation they were exposed to could take years to catch up with them. Nick Dole, ABC News, Chernobyl.
Sri Lanka's President Gotabaya Rajapaksa says he'll appoint a new cabinet within a week in his first address to the nation since protests against the economic crisis began. Now, that will include a replacement for his brother Mahinda, who was forced to step down as Prime Minister on Monday. But demonstrations are likely to continue as protesters blame both men for causing the country's worst economic crisis in history and are continuing to demand the leader's resignation. Joe Biden's top Asia advisor says the White House will be closely monitoring an expected visit to Solomon Islands by China's foreign minister. The ABC has been told Wang Yi is likely to travel to Honiara next week, potentially landing in Solomon Islands just days before the federal election. China and Solomon Islands recently signed a deeply contentious security pact, and the federal government has labelled the potential trip provocative. Kurt Campbell says the US is watching carefully.
I think we just have to acknowledge we are likely heading into a new period where China's ambitions and engagements in the Pacific are larger than in the past.
China's foreign ministry has not confirmed whether the visit will go ahead. The federal government has expressed its sincere condolences to the family of a Papua New Guinea's Deputy Prime Minister who has died following a car crash. Sam Basil was the leader of PNG's United Labour Party and was also the country's Minister for Transport and Infrastructure. Police say the crash occurred between two vehicles in Morobe province last night. Mr Basil died in hospital while waiting to be airlifted to Port Moresby. A blame game has erupted over the shooting death of an American-Palestinian journalist in the West Bank. Veteran Al Jazeera reporter Shireen Abu Akleh was shot and killed while reporting from the West Bank, her colleagues and Palestinians say, by Israeli forces. But Israel's Prime Minister says his forces didn't fire the fatal shots. Alison Horn reports from Jerusalem.
A man calls out desperately for an ambulance, but only gunshots respond. Amongst the barrage, Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh is shot and killed. Another journalist crouches down to help her, but is forced back by gunfire. Abu Akleh's colleague was also shot, but is now in a stable condition.
The occupation is murderous and criminal. They shoot us for no reason.
She wasn't just my aunt, she's also my best friend, my second mom.
Inside her home, relatives gather in stunned silence. But outside, people were demanding answers. An Israeli policeman is mobbed by mourners as he tries to enter the home. The media organisation she works for, Al Jazeera, says Israeli troops fired the fatal shots. Israel says it's now investigating, but Palestine says it must be done independently.
They are the criminals and the criminals cannot investigate themselves.
Israel's Prime Minister says this video is proof that Palestinian gunmen could have fired the shots as his forces were conducting a raid in the area.
The Palestinian Authority was quick to blame Israel before any investigation.
But an Israeli human rights group says it's very unlikely the fatal shots were fired from here, saying Abu Akleh was too far away.
Since April, the Israeli military has been performing regular raids in Jenin in the wake of several attacks. And in a region long rocked by tension, Abu Akleh's death is seen by some as not only an attack on press freedom, but also on Palestinians.
Shireen Abu Akleh, once the voice for the people, now it's the people speaking out for her. Alison Horn, ABC News, Jerusalem.
Let's return to the war in Ukraine, where Russian forces are being pushed back from the eastern city of Kharkiv. It comes as Finland's President and Prime Minister declare their intent to join NATO in defiance of their territorial neighbour Russia. Retired Army General Mick Ryan says the announcement is a strategic win for the alliance in their efforts to increase pressure on Vladimir Putin.
We saw that amazing press conference by Finnish Prime Minister Marin and her Swedish counterpart a few weeks ago, where they telegraphed that this might be the case. Finland have now announced they'll seek NATO membership. That's a long process. It could take up to a year, but it will more than double the amount of land along the Russian border occupied by a NATO nation.
And turning to the war that's currently being fought right now, how effective is the Ukrainian counter-offensive around Kharkiv? And does that give hope to Ukrainian troops that they may be gaining an upper hand more widely across the east?
Yeah, I think so. This is a really important counter-offensive. It's way beyond the limited counter-attacks we saw in the north. It is pushing the Russians well out of artillery range of the city of Kharkiv. That's an important humanitarian and political objective for Ukraine. But it's also posing a threat to the Russian offensive in the east. They've got a big decision to make. Do they intercede around Kharkiv? And to do that, they might have to draw forces from their eastern offensive.
And for the first time during this war, Russian soldiers are about to stand trial in Ukraine. What crimes are they being accused of?
Well, there's a range of crimes. Obviously, the most important ones will be murder. It's important that Ukraine does this in a transparent way. The worst thing that could happen, given all the support of the West, is that there's some kind of informal justice against these Russians accused of war crime. What we're seeing so far, Ukraine's doing everything right, being transparent and using the rule of law to go after these Russians.
And why is this process taking place so quickly in the middle of a conflict?
Well, the collection of evidence is very important, and that has to be done as quickly as possible. But also, if the Russians are there and the Ukrainians can catch them and incarcerate them and investigate them quickly, I think that's in the interests of the victims, and it's also in the interests of international law more generally.
So what will be some of the challenges as they take them to trial, and could they be facing lengthy jail terms if found guilty?
They could be, but they have to be taken to a trial if there's sufficient evidence. They have to be given a decent defence. And then they have to be found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. It's important that all these steps are adhered to because Ukraine so far has really acted as a pretty good international citizen during this war, and I'm sure they want to continue that.
Now, Mick, the leaders of Ukraine and Russia gave two very different speeches earlier this week, both very significant and really highlighting the crux of the war between them.
No, they certainly did, although President Putin's was probably watched more widely because the expectation of a mobilisation of war declaration, that didn't happen. But in both their speeches, neither leader was backing down. That was expected from Zelensky and probably expected from Putin. But it certainly revealed the different worldviews of these leaders. Putin is one that sees his country under threat from outside. That is a more imaginary threat. Zelensky is under a real threat, which the West is helping him defend against.
Well, the US has announced another tranche of aid to Ukraine. Are we seeing a change in the nature of assistance being provided?
We are. The Lend-Lease Act, which has just been passed in the United States, speeds up the provision of US military assistance in particular to Ukraine. But this large $39 billion package isn't just about military aid. There's a large component that will go to their Department of State for a range of other assistance measures for the state of Ukraine.
Just finally, Mick, can you give us an update on what the situation is like in Mariupol, which has been under attack for a long time now?
Well, the defenders of Mariupol continue to hold out. I imagine their circumstances are very grim, and good leadership will be at the heart of that defence. I can't see them giving up at this point in time, but I also can't see the Russians giving up their attempt to capture those steelworks.
Mick Ryan, thank you for your analysis as always.
Thank you.
The United States has marked the deaths of 1 million people from COVID-19. In a statement, President Joe Biden called it a tragic milestone and urged Americans to remain vigilant amid the ongoing pandemic. The loss represents about 1 death for every 327 Americans, or more than the entire population of San Francisco or Seattle. Mr. Biden is pushing Congress to fund billions more in COVID and aid as new variants emerge. Flags will be flown at half-mast as the White House hosts a second global COVID summit. Well, the US Senate has blocked an attempt by the Democrats to pass a bill protecting nationwide access to abortion. It follows a leaked document suggesting the Supreme Court might overturn the landmark Roe v. Wade ruling on abortion. Manny Sigas reports.
House Democrats marched to the US Senate to watch what many called a protest gesture with little chance of success.
I urge my colleagues, take a stand. I urge my colleagues and Americans to fight back. I urge Americans and everyone here to defend the right to choose.
The Democrats were determined to convince Republicans the Women's Health Protection Act was less about abortions and more about compassion. But those in the Senate remained unmoved.
Where's the attempt to understand that the majority of Americans want there to be prohibitions on abortions at some point in the pregnancy?
It needed 60 votes to be fully debated, but
the yeas are 49, the nays are 51.
We are not going to let Senate Republicans override women's voices. They may have spoken out today, they may feel they've won today. But women of America, it's time for us to stand up and fight, and that is exactly what we're going to do.
The Democrats had sought to head off an impending Supreme Court opinion that's expected to overturn a nearly 50-year-old decision to establish a national right to abortion. It would allow the states themselves to determine policies, with at least 26 of them likely to ban abortion outright.
What we are seeing around this country are extremist Republican leaders who are seeking to criminalize and punish women for making decisions about their own body.
But the nays also included a lone Democrat, Senator Joe Manchin, and anti-abortion groups are vowing to fight on. These are the officers of Wisconsin Family Action, reportedly targeted by a pro-choice group using Molotov cocktails and graffiti.
We no longer feel completely secure in our workplace. We've got security on the premises now that we've hired to bring in on this.
The High Court ruling is expected in the coming weeks. While the Democrats were defeated this time, they hope the widespread public support for abortion rights will propel more of their candidates to victory during midterm elections in November. Manny Sigas, ABC News.
Anthony Albanese has clarified his stance on the minimum wage, narrowing the number of workers he believes should get a pay rise in line with inflation. The Labor leader says he was referring to the near 200,000 lowest paid workers, not the 2.5 million others whose pay is pegged to the minimum wage. Well, the Prime Minister is facing his own irritations over a captain's pick candidate and a near run-in with an angry ex-diplomat. Here's political editor Andrew Probyn.
This close to election day, leaders go where the fight's tight. Anthony Albanese on the hunt in the Queensland seat of Flynn.
Just watch your head.
Scott Morrison in Bass, Tasmania, seeking to shore up support in his most marginal seat.
The whole environment that you're trying to operate in.
With a mental health commitment close to his colleague's heart.
I have anxiety and panic disorders and having a bit of a panic attack when I walked in here this morning, so I'm in the right place.
Bridget Archer deftly handling awkward questions about a Liberal hopeful's transphobic campaign.
LGBTIQ community members are some 15 times more likely to suffer mental health challenges. I think we all should be very mindful of that.
But it's the stoush over wages that lives on, including in the final leaders' debate.
The idea that 2 cups of coffee a day is something that would damage the economy is, I believe, just not the case.
A 5%, 0.1% increase, he might be trying to walk it back now. That would push up inflation.
A shiny prop even carried over from the night before.
$1.
Whether those people on the minimum wage in Australia get $1.
Don't let him near the till, because he doesn't know how much things cost.
Mr Albanese has backed a 5.1% increase to the minimum wage, which is paid to 184,000 workers. The wages of 2.5 million others are pegged to the minimum wage. The Labor leader today clarifying it's not them he has in mind.
What I am talking about here is people who are on $20.33 an hour that the federal government says they should have their real wage cut.
He has had 3 positions on the one thing on one day. He knows he got that wrong.
The longer this campaign goes, the harder it is to see a path to victory for Scott Morrison. National polling confirms the PM is facing a double threat, not only from an increasingly confident Labor Party, but Teal independents who could be on the verge of snatching a seat or two from inner-city Liberals. The Prime Minister reminded of another trouble at a Tasmanian cheese shop.
We have lost the plot in the South Pacific.
A former High Commissioner to the Solomon Islands prevented from giving the PM a gobful over his handling of the Pacific relationship. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
India's Supreme Court has quashed a colonial-era sedition law, deciding it was outdated and being abused to crack down on free speech. The rule, introduced in the 19th century, was an effort by the British administration to quell India's pro-independence movement. Shoaib Daniel, associate editor at Indian news website Scroll, says the ruling party has co-opted the law in recent years to punish anti-government voices.
So the sedition law is actually a colonial relic that punishes disaffection to the government. It was brought in by the British colonial government to sort of crush the freedom movement, to crush people who were literally, their aim was to promote disaffection to the government. Unfortunately, it's sort of stuck on even after independence and is now being used to target, people, activists, and anybody really that the ruling party right now does not like.
So what did the Supreme Court have to say in suspending the law?
So the Supreme Court is hearing a batch of petitions which called for a judicial review of sedition. And whilst it was hearing it, the India's central government, the union government, our federal government, was quite opposed to the court hearing the law. But possibly because it sensed that things were going south for it, it pitched a proposal to the court saying that it will actually have a relook at the law. And in response to that, the Supreme Court said that the law would be held in abeyance or would be frozen till the central government carried out such an exercise.
So what happens next? Because this doesn't overturn the law, only Parliament can do that.
So Parliament could overturn the law. The Supreme Court could also overturn the law under India's judicial system, where courts have the power of judicial review. Right now, as you said, neither of the two have actually happened. So we're in a bit of a limbo right now, where the law has been frozen, but hasn't actually been struck down or even actually changed. So right now, the ball is in the court of India's central government, which is the BJP-led Modi government. And it has promised to review the law, but right now there is unfortunately nothing concrete that we have as to what that entails. Because remember, till very recently, till a few weeks back, the government was actually a supporter of the law. So we really have no concrete outcome as to what the law will become, but it's still a very positive development because the law, as of now, cannot be used by the police, and if it is used, people could go to courts for relief.
So how controversial has the law become over the years, and what are some of the high-profile examples of how the law has reportedly been misused?
So the law has been extremely widely misused by governments right since independence, but has really seen a big rise since, I would say, 2014, when the current ruling party, which is the BJP, the Hindu nationalist BJP, came to power. They're a muscular nationalist party, so for them, sedition actually carries a real meaning, and to prosecute for sedition is something that they've frequently done. Some really egregious examples that just come to mind are, there's a journalist who's now in jail for 1.5 years for covering a rape in the state of Uttar Pradesh. He's in jail for sedition for 1.5 years, no trial till now. There have been college kids put in jail for supposedly supporting Pakistan in cricket. So, you know, supporting the wrong cricket team in India could get you put in jail under sedition, because the law is so widely defined, or rather it's not defined very narrowly, is because so that you can put pretty much anyone in jail. Convictions are very low. Right now, conviction rates are in the single digits in terms of percentages. But, you know, in India, that really doesn't matter, because the process is the punishment. You'll be in prison for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, you know, and without trial. And by the time your trial finishes and you're held to be not guilty, you know, you've already sort of suffered a sort of punishment. And that's what sedition allows governments to quickly do to crush dissent. So hopefully this is a positive development.
Yeah, so Shoaib, how significant is it that it has ended up in India's top court at this time with this outcome?
I think it's a very significant move because for the past few years, we've been seeing questions around how much of a check India's judiciary is on an increasingly muscular central government. So obviously there's still a long way to go, but this is a good sign that the judiciary has stepped up to check what is clearly an outrageous law. I mean, you know, Mr. Mahatma Gandhi made the sedition law a centerpiece of his freedom struggle in 1922. He pleaded guilty to sedition. So for modern India to use that law is not only wrong in law, it's wrong in morals, but it's absolutely, it denies our own history as a country, as how we won our independence.
And just lastly, what has the reaction been across the country?
I think there's been a reaction mostly of relief because the law was widely held to be misused. There are sections in India, which is why the law has stayed for so long, which do want the law to stay on, because there's a hyper-nationalist section in India who would want the law to stay on. But right now, since that section is most represented by the BJP, and the BJP has taken a line which says the law should be struck down, that section is still now quiet. But let's see what happens eventually with the law, and that's when we'll come to know the proof of the pudding will be in the eating.
We'll be keeping an eye on it. Shoaib Daniel, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Queensland is again on alert as heavy rain causes flash flooding in the southeast and river levels to rise, with areas that have already gone under this year again in the firing line. Overnight, a man had to be rescued from floodwaters as he clung to a tree near Bundaberg.
Another desperate search underway in a flood-ravaged region. Emergency crews looking for a 36-year-old camper and his dog at Imbil.
There's 5 water crossings to get through to get to just that location to commence the search. All of those are flooded.
But late this afternoon, good news, the man found safe and well. Southeast Queensland is again awash, hit by another severe weather system. Brisbane's Wivenhoe Dam is spilling, with releases expected to flood bridges and crossings.
This is an evolving rainfall situation, and we're certainly not out of the woods yet.
The rain is triggering traumatic memories for Tegan Cornacchia, who has been through multiple floods at North Buval.
I didn't sleep last night. No one in my house has slept last night.
She's housing another local family in a tent in her backyard.
We shouldn't be in this situation, honestly.
In the Lockyer Valley, roads are cut into Grantham, where police door-knocked locals as a precaution.
There are certainly people in our community that are upset, that are anxious, people that haven't even finished cleaning up from the last event.
There's anxiety in Gympie too. The city has already been through 2 major floods this year.
We come here for the weather, you know, and all it does is rain.
These tradies have repaired more than 25 houses so far. They'd hate to see their hard work undone. Janice Flaubert has only just put her home back together again.
A bit apprehensive.
The Mary River could reach 12 metres tonight.
Bit of deja vu on one hand and also a little bit of, I suppose, a little bit of edginess.
Beaches remained closed on the Gold Coast, with plenty of surfers taking advantage of the big swell. More rain and storms are expected in already saturated catchments. There is at least some relief for flood-affected residents on the financial front. From today, they can register for the Resilient Homes Fund to access money to raise, retrofit or repair their homes.
We are asking people today to register their interest and to tell us what is important and what does they need to support their recovery here.
Valerie Perryman is hoping for a buyback. She doesn't want to rebuild her home at Beenleigh.
Because it's going to continue to happen again and again and again, and that just seems pointless to me. It's a lot of pain and suffering unnecessarily.
Something that many flood victims can relate to. Jessica Ross, ABC News, Gympie.
Australia has been awarded hosting rights for the 2027 Men's and 2029 Women's Rugby World Cups. It'll be the third time Australia's hosted the men's event after co-hosting the first tournament with New Zealand back in 1987. It then won sole rights in 2003. The 2027 tournament is projected to generate nearly $3 billion for the Australian economy. You're watching The World. The top stories we're following tonight. Finland's leaders have announced the country should apply to join the NATO defence alliance without delay. It shares a 1,300-kilometre border with Russia, and the invasion of Ukraine has seen public support for Finland's NATO membership surge. The federal government has expressed condolences to the family of Papua New Guinea's Deputy Prime Minister Sam Basil, who has died following a car crash. And Australia has been awarded hosting rights for the 2027 Men's and 2029 Women's Rugby World Cups. North Korea has ordered a strict national lockdown after confirming its first official COVID infections more than 2 years into the pandemic. As North Asia correspondent James Ocean reports, it highlights a potentially major crisis in a country that lacks medical resources and refuses international help with vaccinations.
As the world's most secretive state, it's actually really hard to get an idea of how severe this lockdown is. We know the phrase maximum response has been used. We expect cities and workplaces to be locked down, some form of segregation as well. But on the flip side, there's also reports that planned construction will continue and improvements to agriculture will continue as well. So it's quite difficult to get an exact measurement of how severe this lockdown will be, but we do expect to be at least pretty harsh. The fact that this is the first time North Korea has confirmed cases does imply this outbreak is quite significant. There have been unconfirmed reports before, but this is the first time Pyongyang has admitted that there is now an Omicron outbreak within its borders. So certainly, it leaves the country quite vulnerable. We've had hard borders in this country to try and prevent COVID from getting in the first place, and the country's Politburo seems pretty unhappy with now that they're dealing with an outbreak. So really it's a matter of seeing how they're going to respond now that the outbreak is underway. The country has an atrocious healthcare system, and as far as we know, we don't know anyone who's been vaccinated in the country at all. In fact, the World Health Organization says it's one of only 2 countries that has not vaccinated or even begun vaccinating the population. So you've got an unvaccinated population, a poor and impoverished healthcare system. So the worry is that this could be really quite devastating to the 26 million people who live in North Korea. Now, this is a country that has shunned offers from other countries for vaccines, including the COVAX program, which is set up to try and deal with vaccine inequality. The reasons are unclear why it has shunned these offers as well, but perhaps it's just the usual that North Korea doesn't like having outsiders come in and being part of their system, and it might open them up to further scrutiny.
James Ocean there. Now, Labor has accused Scott Morrison of actively encouraging the controversial Darwin port deal. The Northern Territory government leased the port to Chinese company Landbridge in 2015. The federal opposition says documents show that when the Prime Minister was Treasurer, he approved a multi-million-dollar incentive payment to the Territory government to privatise the port.
The decision to lease the Darwin port to a Chinese-owned company in 2015 continues to be the focus of rancorous political debate.
You allowed it to happen? No, we didn't. The federal government had absolutely no authority over that sale whatsoever.
Landbridge paid $506 million to the former NT-CLP government in return for a 99-year lease over the strategic maritime asset. At the time, the deal was given the all-clear by national security agencies. But Labor says Scott Morrison, who was Treasurer at the time, should have done more to block the lease. Instead, the opposition claims he actively encouraged it.
Scott Morrison signs off an agreement, signs this agreement, in fact, and there's his signature there, in 2016, effectively providing a sweetener, encouragement, an incentive.
The incentive payment was part of a federal program designed to encourage state and territory governments to privatise assets and reinvest the funds in new infrastructure. The opposition says these Commonwealth documents show $19.5 million was promised to the NT government for the privatisation of the Port of Darwin, in an arrangement signed off by Scott Morrison 6 months after the facility was leased.
He still fails to take responsibility for the fact that he put money on the table to sweeten the deal for the NT government.
The ABC has sought comment from the coalition but is yet to receive a response. Last year, amid rising tensions with China, the federal government initiated a new national security review of the port deal. While the review hasn't been made public, the Prime Minister has previously said he's received no advice to revoke the lease. Jono Gibson, ABC News.
Just hours from now, day 2 of semi-finals at the Eurovision Song Contest will get underway. Australia's Sheldon Riley will take the stage to perform his song, Not the Same, in hopes of making the top 10 ahead of this weekend's grand final. Let's go to Turin now, where Eurovision expert and member of the Estonia delegation, Liam Clark, is standing by now. Liam, talk us through Australia's entry.
Yes, so this year we are represented by The Voice and indeed America's Got Talent alum Sheldon Riley. He has a very avant-garde, ostentatious style and a very, very, very good baritone voice, and is about to present his ballad, Not the Same, an ode to feeling like you don't fit in a world full of neurotypical, heterosexual, Caucasian people. Very, very, I think, on brand with what Australia has sent to Eurovision thus far, and a very, very strong contender to get through to the final. I believe it's the third favourite in tonight's semi-final.
So who will Sheldon have to beat to progress? How close will the competition be?
So it's a bit of a tough semi-final, but the other main contenders in the show are looking like Sweden. Sweden is almost a given to qualify. They are kind of the kings of Eurovision. Fortunately for me, Estonia is looking like a hot favourite this year. And very impressive live vocals from Poland and Azerbaijan will also have to contend with Sheldon, as they are male-driven big power ballads.
Well, you're with the Estonian delegation. What can you reveal about their performance today?
So our song this year is kind of a spaghetti western-inspired ballad for, well, not even ballad, but like anthem for togetherness. It's called Hope. It was written by our singer Stefan to try and bring people together after a rough 2 years, and being in Estonia, the proximity to the war in Ukraine has really given the song a whole new meaning, and we're fairly confident that Europe is going to resonate with that tonight.
Well, Ukraine seems to be front and centre in this competition. How do you think they'll fare? They're hot favourites to win?
They are indeed the favourite to win this year, and a lot of people are calling that almost like a political sympathy thing. But what people sort of tend to forget is that Ukraine is the country that has the perfect attendance record at this point. They've never failed to qualify. They always provide something really, really good. I do think that their televote particularly will be bolstered by a lot of feeling of sympathy and empathy for the people of Ukraine. But that typically hasn't followed through with juries in the past. In the 90s, people thought the same thing would happen with Bosnia, and they finished on average 15th each time. So I think if Ukraine does win, it's going to be augmented by sympathy, but also because they have a cracker of a song.
And Lim, they'll be singing in Ukrainian in a year where there are relatively few songs in English.
Well, comparatively few songs in English, particularly from this first semi-final. I think it's the first time we have seen a semi-final with a majority non-English songs qualifying, with 5 songs in full other language aside from English and 1 bilingual. And minority language as well, like Icelandic, Dutch, and the first song in Lithuanian since 1999. This semi-final that we're going into tonight, there are only 3 songs that don't contain full English, and one of them is half Serbian, half Latin. So it's going to be a bit more English dominant from this semi-final, but this year is absolutely much less English-centric than usual.
Sounds amazing nonetheless. Well, it seems like Eurovision's back on track after 2 years of the pandemic. What is different this time around, though?
So it's not quite as shut down and restrained as last year. Last year, the artists could only go to the hotel or the arena, nothing else. It feels sort of like halfway there. There's no real partying as there used to be. There would always be like lots of social events and concerts held between countries. Everyone is keeping their distance a little bit more. I'm getting a little bit of looks back here by not wearing a mask, but I am distancing from everyone else. I believe we're getting back on track to a normal Eurovision, and it does definitely feel better than last year, where I was speaking to you from my bedroom in Melbourne. But this year, it's better than nothing.
Indeed, indeed. And we're so glad we can talk to you this year as well. So just finally, tell us, Liam, what are you most excited about? What have been the highlights and what are you looking forward to in the coming days?
Well, I'm really enjoying, all this Italian food and coffee. I mean, being a Melbourne boy, the coffee's got to get to me. But the show is really slick. The Italians have done the unthinkable and managed to put on a TV show that runs within the time allotted, and it is a really good show. The hosts are really nice and have great chemistry together, and the staging, while it looked a little rocky at first, everyone has a really good performance. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing who will win. There's 5 countries in contention, which is always exciting. I think it's going to be a really fun year to watch.
Fantastic, Liam. We'll be watching from here in Australia. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Yvonne.
And keep enjoying those coffees too. China's government has arrested a 90-year-old Catholic ex-cardinal, amongst others, in Hong Kong, claiming they are a threat to national security. Retired Cardinal Joseph Zen, pop singer Denise Ho, and at least 2 others have been arrested for alleged collusion with foreigner forces under the Beijing-imposed national security law. The group was in charge of a relief fund that provided legal aid for protesters in the 2019 pro-democracy demonstration. A wildfire has been raging through the southern coast of California, forcing several residents to evacuate. The coastal fire has burned through an estimated 200 acres of land and destroyed at least 20 homes in the Laguna Niguel region. Officials say that dry and strong coastal winds have accelerated the small fire. They also say climate change is increasing the risk and severity of these incidents in the area. Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese have just a bit more than a week to convince voters they and their team should govern the country. ABC Vote Compass has asked you to rate the leaders out of 10 on competency and trustworthiness. Bridget Brennan has more.
At the pointy end of the campaign, the volume is getting higher.
We have put forward. It is right, actually.
And the personal attacks are becoming sharper.
You haven't got a plan.
Despite the noise, when Australians go to the ballot box next weekend, they'll be assessing the level of trust they place in each leader.
So how competent do voters find Anthony Albanese and Scott Morrison? Marked out of 10, it wasn't quite a high distinction for either leader. Vote Compass shows Australians scored Scott Morrison a 3 and Anthony Albanese a 5. And on the question of trustworthiness, Australians marked Mr Morrison a 2.8 and Mr Albanese a 5.2.
This is consistent with the types of surveys that we see over time in Australian studies. Australians are tough judges on their political leaders.
The Prime Minister's ratings have fallen since 2019. It's not surprising. It's another 3 years in office. It's been a difficult 3 years. He's clearly lost some bark with the electorate.
Overall, on trust and competency, Vote Compass shows the Prime Minister scored a 3 and the Labor leader a 5. Since 2019, Australians' view on Scott Morrison's trustworthiness and competency has fallen. At the last election, Bill Shorten had a similar rating.
The results are very similar to the preferred Prime Minister polls we see published, and they show that Scott Morrison is not as popular or respected as he was at the last election, and Anthony Albanese is rating much higher than Bill Shorten did in 2019.
And compared to men, Australian women marked Scott Morrison down on the question of trust and competency.
So I think the most telling thing that's come out of this data from Vote Compass is the gender differences in the responses. Women, irrespective of partisanship, overall are really marking Scott Morrison down.
This election, the Greens are hopeful of swings in key urban seats.
The Greens are on the march.
Vote Compass shows leader Adam Bandt scored a 4 overall on the question of trust and competency. To tell us what you think and find out how your views align with those of Australia's political parties, visit Vote Compass online and fill out the survey yourself.
The Northern Ireland Protocol is causing problems for Britain's trade relationship with the European Union. The post-Brexit trading arrangement means goods from Britain going to Northern Ireland have to be checked because Northern Ireland still follows some EU rules. It's also stopped Sinn Féin from forming government after the Nationalist Party's victory in last week's election.
For some businesses in Northern Ireland, trading opportunities have grown, but adapting to new rules since Brexit can cause disruption too. This garden centre in Belfast is dealing with extra paperwork and supply issues.
It's slowed our deliveries down. We would order a lot of stuff from England, from Holland. Our frustration is that we're a very weather-dependent business. As soon as the weather's good, we need to get ordering. So we could usually order for a Monday for Friday delivery. That's completely changed now. We're now ordering 2 to 3 weeks ahead, and it's very hard to do that considering the uncertainty of the weather.
And this is why the extra checks are happening. When we left the EU, it was agreed that goods arriving in Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK would be monitored to make sure they met EU standards. That's because Northern Ireland shares a land border with EU member Ireland, and Brussels doesn't want unchecked products ending up in its single market. An open border is seen as an essential part of the peace process. Last week's Northern Ireland's Assembly elections have upped the pressure again.
108.
Sinn Féin won. They say the Brexit arrangements must stay, but they can't govern unless unionists share power, which they're refusing to do unless the protocol is scrapped.
And you're in Washington today.
And UK ministers are in Washington explaining why changes are essential.
This is the bundle of documents that has to be filled out by companies moving goods within our own country. We still want a negotiated solution. But if your negotiating partner is at the point of saying there's nothing to talk about, then we have a moral obligation to take action to protect our citizens in Northern Ireland.
The UK government wants smoother trade arrangements and is threatening to take matters into its own hands by scrapping parts of the Brexit treaty it signed up to, which could mean trouble ahead.
Unilateral action will make all of this worse, because what it will do is it'll result in legal action, it'll result in potentially countermeasures, and nobody wants to see friction between the European Union and the UK right now.
But senior cabinet ministers here think this situation has dragged on for far too long. They're even considering the dramatic step of drawing up a new law which would allow them to ignore parts of the Brexit treaty that Boris Johnson signed. That could come as soon as next week and could lead to a trade war. Many fear this is sowing the seeds for a wider confrontation with the EU that could affect businesses across the UK.
The largest white diamond ever sent to auction has sold for over $31 million in Switzerland. The 228-carat white diamond, known as The Rock, was mined and polished in South Africa over 2 decades ago. The sale started at 14 million Swiss francs, or just over $20 million, before going to a telephone bidder. Another historically significant diamond known as the Red Cross, a 205-carat intense yellow diamond, sold for $20.5 million. Victoria's Sports Minister Martin Pakula says the Argentinian Football Association needs to answer questions about why its national team has pulled out of next month's friendly against Brazil in Melbourne. 60,000 tickets have been sold to the match at the MCG next month. It was to be played as part of Brazil's preparations for the World Cup later this year.
We're pretty disappointed, and I think it's fair to say pretty pissed off. And I think they owe Australian football fans an explanation.
More than 95,000 fans turned up the last time the teams met in Melbourne back in 2017. They mocked him when he was appointed, but Ange Postecoglou has had the last laugh after leading Celtic to the Scottish Football Premiership in just his first year in charge of the famous club. The former Socceroos coach can now lay claim to being one of Australian sport's greatest success stories after winning titles in 3 countries. Here's national sport reporter David Mark.
It's a remarkable achievement for Ange Postecoglou.
Scottish football fans now know what Australians have known for many years. Ange Postecoglou is a coach who quite simply wins.
The Celtic are champions of Scotland.
All it took was a 1-1 draw against Dundee United to confirm the premiership for Celtic.
You know, I think we're worthy champions. We've overcome every obstacle thrown at us, including a difficult start, and you know, I think rightly deserved to end up on top.
He understands Celtic. He's come into this club and been a breath of fresh air.
He's won over the fans, but the critics were scathing when Postecoglou took over as manager of one of Europe's most successful clubs.
Was it Postecoglou? Oh, he'd be a great manager. Huh? Where did they come up with these guys from?
Those critics hadn't done their research.
He's very motivating. I think he speaks really well. He hits the right notes when it comes to inspiring teams to perform.
Back-to-back championships with Brisbane Roar put Postecoglou on the map.
The Socceroos, champions of Asia.
It took the Socceroos to their greatest heights, winning the Asian Cup. Then gave it all up for another challenge, taking Japan's Yokohama F. Marinos to the J-League title. And now he's done the same for Celtic.
It's a massive event. I mean, they're very passionate about their football in Scotland.
Coaching, let alone winning, in Europe is uncharted waters in football's homeland. But Ange Postecoglou is no ordinary coach. David Mark, ABC News.
The Sydney Kings are celebrating their first NBL championship since 2005. After completing a 3-0 clean sweep of their grand final series against the Tasmania Jack Jumpers. The 97 points to 88 win in front of a record crowd in Sydney ended the remarkable run of the Jack Jumpers in their debut season.
What had been a bridge too far for many seasons is now in the hands of the Sydney Kings, although they're still getting used to their championship status.
I don't think it's sunk in as of yet. The celebration will keep going for the next week or so, but just to do it for the city is just unreal.
A grand final record crowd of more than 16,000 turned out on a Wednesday night.
It was loud, it was jumping in there, man, and it made this moment even specialer. More special, I don't think that's a word.
Special,
yeah.
With 23 points and 13 rebounds, Captain Cooks led by example.
And the jam!
We followed him every freaking step of the way and just couldn't be more proud of you.
Thanks, Coach. I really appreciate that, man.
Sydney was missing injured league MVP Jalen Adams, but former Golden State Warrior Ian Clark showed his championship-winning qualities.
He's seeing that ring like a hula hoop.
He brought that veteran leadership to the locker room that we needed, and that scoring punch off the bench.
The Tasmania Jack Jumpers lost 2 players to flu on the day of the game, but didn't lose any admirers during their debut season.
What they were able to accomplish in a short amount of time and the culture that's been built, it's fairy tale. It's Cinderella. It's everything great about sports.
The 17-year drought is over. All hail the Kings.
The Kings were once ridiculed with the Violet Crumbles tag, but this squad proved much harder to break as it delivered the franchise a fourth championship. Duncan Huntsdale, ABC News.
Time for a check of the weather now. Here's Paul Higgins.
Well, this persistent trough in the east is going to keep that rain going over the eastern inland, and the rain band you can see in the west will move further east and eventually weaken. We have a low off the Queensland coast that's heading southwards, and in combination with an upper level low over southeast Queensland, wind and rain will intensify in that area from early tomorrow. There's a warning for heavy rain there and damaging winds on Western Australia's south coast. Another 40 to 70 millimetres of rain for Brisbane, 80 to 150 in Noosa. In Sydney, 15 to 25 millimetres. Canberra and Perth, you'll have showers in the morning. In Hobart, Darwin and Adelaide, you'll have a partly cloudy day, and there's just the chance of a light shower in Melbourne.
Before we go recapping our top stories, Finland's leaders have announced the country should apply to join the NATO Defence Alliance without delay. The federal government has expressed its sincere condolences to the family of Papua New Guinea's Deputy Prime Minister Sam Basil, who's died following a car crash. And Australia has been awarded hosting rights for the 2027 men's and 2029 women's Rugby World Cups. And that's your world for tonight. You can always catch the show on iView, and more world news and interviews can be found at the ABC's YouTube channel. I'm Yvonne Yong. Bye for now.
Comedian Griff Rhys-Jones is taking in an immense, huge and almighty land.
This truly is Canada. Magnificent.
The only way.
Oh! Did you hear that?
He knows how.
Welcome aboard, sir. Thank you.
What we're using is what nature provides.
It looks like magic to me.
Griff's Canadian Adventure. Saturday at 6 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
I know guys in Australia who make customized wetsuits and surf trunks.
We got to stop running the business out the back of my van. It's not sustainable.
I've sustained you so far.
Hey, maybe you become a millionaire. Isn't that the dream?
Wait, this isn't what I came for.
Show them who you really are.
Barron's. Log in to ABC iView to stream the series.
At election time, we all come together to help choose a direction for Australia's future, so it's important that you understand how to make your vote count. For the federal election, you need to complete 2 ballot papers, a green one for the House of Representatives and a large white one for the Senate. On the green ballot paper, put a 1 in the box beside the candidate who is your first choice, then a 2 in the box beside your second choice, and so on until you've numbered every box. On the white Senate ballot paper, put a 1 in the box above the line for the party or group that is your first choice, then a 2 in the box for your second choice, and so on until you've numbered at least 6 boxes. Or you can choose to vote below the line by numbering at least 12 boxes for individual candidates in the order of your choice. Make sure you know how to vote correctly, because your vote will help shape Australia. To learn more, visit aec.gov.au or call 132326. Authorised by the Electoral Commissioner, Canberra.
She's the woman who inspired a political movement.
She was there to stand for something different.
Cathy's the godmother of the independent movement.
On the road with Cathy McGowan.
These teal independents are posing as a real game changer in Australian politics.
It's going to be fierce. They're fighting for cattle stations. They don't want to give up these safe seats.
Independents in a hung parliament actually undermine the government that the majority of Australians elected.
She looks like your mum, but she's very formidable.
On Australian Story, Monday at 8 on ABC TV.
He's more dangerous than he's ever been in the last 22 years.
Red alert.
Putin the Great is what he wants to be.
Vladimir Putin's road to war.
To lie is what he was taught.
This was not the war of the Russian people. This is Vladimir Putin's war.
The question everyone is asking is, what do we do about Vladimir Putin?
He will not be humiliated, and that makes him also much more dangerous.
Four Corners, Monday, ABC TV and ABC iView.
Tuesday, our must-see true crime investigation continues.
I just couldn't understand how he ended up dead.
A serial domestic abuser attacks 2 more judges.
It's him. Why haven't you charged him?
And embarks on a campaign of bombings.
The target is the family court building itself.
And a criminal profiler examines another killing linked to the case.
I think he was saying, I want you to suffer.
The Family Court Murders, Tuesday at 8:30 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
The lost children of Saudi.
Le había dicho a mi mamá que iba a regresar y nunca regresó, entonces...
Every child is entitled to a mother and a father.
And the fathers who abandoned them.
I had that overwhelming urge and drive to find him.
Searching for answers.
He said when he saw me that I look exactly like him. I understand a lot more in detail the culture of his family and the sheer terror that my father must have felt.
Foreign Correspondent next Thursday on ABC and ABC iView.
Good evening, Yvonne Yong with the top stories on ABC News. The wage wars continue. Labor leader Anthony Albanese has clarified his stance on rising wages in line with inflation, saying he's referring to the roughly 200,000 Australians on the minimum wage. Scott Morrison continues to argue an increase would see interest rates rise further, while out on the hustings, an angry ex-diplomat had a near run-in with the Prime Minister. Police are investigating if a shipment of drugs into New South Wales is linked to Indonesia's biggest seizure of cocaine. 62-year-old James Blee has been charged with drug importation and supply offences. He's accused of organising an alleged shipment of cocaine into Newcastle that's linked to the death of a diver on Monday. Queensland is in the grip of another major rain event. The severe weather system is impacting large parts of the state's southeast and interior, with roads and schools impacted. Major flood warnings are in place for parts of the state. And Australia has been awarded hosting rights for the 2027 Men's and 2029 Women's Rugby World Cups. It'll be the third time Australia has hosted the men's event. The 2027 tournament's projected to generate nearly $3 billion for the Australian economy. Those are the latest stories on ABC News.
Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Ellen Fanning, coming to you tonight from the banks of the Brisbane River. In this city, my hometown, where it has been raining a lot. But all that wet and all that humidity hasn't kept the politicians away, because there are 30 federal seats and crucial Senate spots up for grabs in this state. In 2019, Queensland became a coalition stronghold and a place of broken dreams for Labor. 3 years on, we asked what, if anything, has changed. We're here at Bougainvillea House overlooking the Story Bridge on the Indigenous lands of the Jagera and Turrbal people. And joining me on the panel today, Indigenous Chair of Creative Industries at the Queensland University of Technology, Wesley Enoch. Good to see you. Yes. Well, I'm used to saying Queensland Institute of Technology, QIT. That ages me a little, my old alma mater. Former State Director of the Victorian National Party, crisis management consultant Sally Branson, and also Gold Coast Transplant.
That's right. I'm here representing the GC now.
Fantastic. Living the dream. Company Director, writer and former CEO of the Local Government Association of Queensland, Greg Hallam. Lovely to meet you, Greg.
Thank you.
And former Queensland Deputy Labor Premier and Treasurer Jackie Trad. Nice to see you in person.
Hi, Ellen.
I'll put my teeth back in. And you can join us on Twitter using the hashtag #TheDrum, and we're on Facebook. Severe weather systems notwithstanding, Queensland has had the largest population growth in the country over the past year. People like Sally moved here in their thousands, and that trend is set to continue. Queensland's population is expected to grow by 1 million people within 5 years, taking it to 6 million. And it makes Brisbane Australia's fastest growing capital city. So it's a popular place to be for sure. Perhaps that's because there are plenty of jobs and cheaper housing. But the big migration might soon change some of that. Our reporter Stephanie Bolchi has a look.
It's been about 3 weeks since John and his partner moved into their new home in the northern suburbs of Brizzy.
Some of the places we were going to, they were saying they had 70, 80 couples coming through in a day.
which blew my mind. We were waiting. Someone we saw the line and just turned our car around and left.
John's not the only Melburnian wanting a lifestyle change. Most of the people who relocated here in the past year came from New South Wales and Victoria.
In the 90s, certainly, we were going gangbusters, around 50,000 people per year net. But then we really dropped off at the beginning of sort of the 2000s following the GFC, and so this is a bit of an upsurge again. And look, that's also in part due to people staying, so not as many people are leaving Queensland as they were prior to the pandemic.
John would have come sooner, but border closures got in the way. And during that time, the housing situation changed too.
We were looking at, say, 3-bedroom apartments or 3-bedroom townhouses, and then over that 5-6 month period, all of a sudden we lost a bedroom and we were looking at a 2-bedroom for the same price.
And he's not wrong. House prices here went up about $553 per day in the March quarter. And for renters in the Brizzy area, it's hard to find a home at all, with February's vacancy rate hitting less than 1%.
As the population increases, we know housing is becoming an issue. But what about the jobs? In Queensland, they're expecting around 280,000 new jobs by 2025. Most will be in health and social services, followed by accommodation, food services and retail.
I mean, it would be great to see things like increased manufacturing. Queensland's never been a big manufacturing state, but I think, you know, the impacts of the pandemic have shown a need to actually make things.
But right now, the Queensland government's focus is on attracting tradies. The state's shortage became particularly evident as communities began the rebuild after the recent flooding. Yet only 211 out of the 1,000 potential workers have taken up the $1,700 incentive to come here for a couple of months.
If you're living in another state, we want you to come to Queensland. We want you to run to paradise, to come to paradise.
This pitch didn't attract John. He's never heard of it. But he was already transferring through his job in the construction industry. So does he think he ran to paradise?
I am enjoying it. It's very beautiful. Even just getting to know a different city is pretty amazing. But yeah, parts of Queensland, definitely paradise.
So let's start with you, Sally. You're a case in point. Where are you from and why are you here?
Well, we're from Melbourne. I grew up in regional Victoria and moved to Melbourne because that's where my husband was and that's where the work was, that's where the uni was. Uni came a long time before the husband, but that's where we were based. We loved Melbourne, but I always wanted to try something else, maybe a country town. I was very tempted by the country. But at the start of COVID, probably 2 days into lockdown in Melbourne, my husband, we had 2 little children, so a 1-year-old and a 2.5-year-old, nearly 3-year-old. And my husband was the sole provider at the time for our family in that traditional structure. And he had a large-scale food manufacturer which supplied cafes and catering and organising. And I'm really proud of him because he said probably day 2 in the lockdown, I cannot compete with a global pandemic. And he made the decision to walk away. So closed the factory doors and walked away with nothing. And we had a talk and we thought, well, if it wasn't for COVID, there's no COVID silver lining at all. But if it wasn't for COVID, we wouldn't be in this decision-making period. Yeah. So I said to him, what do you want to do? He loves cricket. He's played cricket all his life. He's coached. He said, I want to be a professional cricket coach. So I was like, let's do it. So in lockdown, we've got an online business as well. So I spent the time trying to ramp that up because everyone was shopping online. And he retrained and did all of his certification for cricket coaching, which is very detailed, and working with children. And he was really passionate about working with young people and a love of cricket. And he emailed, like a cold call, but emailed every cricket school and said, this is who I am. I want to work with you. I will work for free. And one cricket school in the Gold Coast emailed back and said, I've got 8 hours a week for you. So we packed everything up, kids, house, for 8 hours, and we came up. And we are so police. We did, even if some people think, eye roll and think, oh, these Victorians coming up and taking over everything. But we made the decision because everyone comes to Queensland and they say, oh my God, this is such an amazing place. Why don't we live here? Why do we only come here on holidays? Well, we thought, well, let's do it. Instead of just saying, come here on holidays, it's extraordinary.
Yeah. Whereas it's interesting that you see a lot of Southerners. Do you like how I'm talking like
I know,
a local
yeah,
man?
you've positioned yourself.
You see a lot of Southerners come up to the Golden Sunshine Coast and to other parts of Queensland. You see a lot of Brisbane people coming home.
Yeah.
And you've come home not to Brisbane but to Minjerribah, to North Stradbroke.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I finished up at the Sydney Festival and I kind of went, what am I going to do? What's the kind of, what makes me feel comfortable? And coming back home, I mean, there's this thing about feeling comfortable about the weather as well. I mean, some people say, oh, the humidity, whatever, but it's what you grow up with and what you know. And things grow in Queensland, you know? People grow, gardens grow, businesses grow, everything grows here. So there's this part of me that just goes, why turn your back on this history, this knowledge of this particular place? And being back on North Stradbroke Island is amazing. I have turned into a gardener that I've never been before. And things are so fecund. Everything just kind of bursts out of the ground. And being on country is such an important part for me. Like being Quandamooka people, getting involved in local politics is fun. You know, family politics is fun. But also this idea of those who have gone away and have developed skills and knowledges and stuff, coming home, Brisbane's a very different place to what it was in the 80s. And when I say to some Southerners, they go, oh, Queensland, oh, do you even read a book there and all that kind of stuff? You start to go, actually, sometimes their attitudes of Queensland are 40 years old. They think we're still living under Joe Bjelke-Petersen years. And, you know, we were talking earlier about, you know, Pauline Hanson doesn't help, you know, or Clive Palmer doesn't help that to change that narrative. But it's a very sophisticated city and its cultural life being a very outdoor city, I think makes it very Australian as well.
Yeah. Interestingly, Jackie, you were the infrastructure minister. Do you take a sharp intake of breath when you hear those numbers, 1 million people coming in 5 years, houses, roads, schools, the whole lot?
I was also planning minister, so infrastructure, transport planning, all of these are essential ingredients in terms of planning for that population growth. In fact, with the councils of South East Queensland, as Greg would know, we delivered a South East Queensland regional plan that had a 50-year vision. And I think it's safe to say that no one, at the time, we didn't predict COVID, we didn't predict some of those impacts that would have a big migrationary pull up to Queensland.
And in fact, you know, in 2019, we were talking about Melbourne. This was happening in Melbourne. Whatever it was, a school a week, a school a month, they were having to build in Melbourne. But the movement has transferred up to here. So to what extent is there a bit of a scramble to catch up, as we saw with the, you know, Run to Paradise, trying to get tradies up here, not only to build the houses for the, whatever it is, 280,000 people, who are going to come into jobs in this place in the next 5 years, but to repair after the floods.
Yeah, but this isn't just based on the migration into Queensland. It's also based on the fact that we've had historically low interest rates. People have not been able to travel, so they're using their disposable income around house renovations. So what you've got is a system that's already been locked and loaded into a particular work pattern. Then you've had people migrate up to Queensland. So there's a real pressure on the system because of a whole range of factors, not just population growth, but that is certainly something that has accelerated the issue.
And Greg, put on your former CEO of the Local Government Association Queensland hat. Think about all the LGAs. Just tell me quickly, who's seeing the growth? Where are you seeing the growth?
Well, this time round, first time in 30 or 40 years, it's the regions. They've got the strongest growth, believe it or not, greater than SEQ. So if you talk about places like the Fraser Coast, so Harvey Bay, that part of the world, sort of the Capricorn Coast, the coastal areas around Agnes and Agnes Waters, 1770.
Way up north.
Way up north. And indeed, first-hand experience of talking to mayors in places like St George and Ewendon and Richmond, they've got new families, even if it's 3 or 4 coming to their towns, and they haven't got the housing stock. It's either run down, derelict, or doesn't exist. So this is statewide. It's probably been at least 20, 25 years since we've seen this influence. The tap's been turned back on, and this mass migration throughout Queensland's occurring.
Isn't that extraordinary? Before we move on, this perspective of Brisbane, courtesy of comedian Jimmy Reese.
Oh, hello there, Brisbane. Let's see what you got here. Oh, no shoes, a gurney and a shovel. Active wear you don't get active in, but do sweat in. A wide-brimmed brown hat that's the same colour as the river. Sunscreen, the inability to merge into traffic. Left and right indicators. What's the point if you don't use them? An esky, a very large fan, a case of Forex. Small flex to your Melbourne friends about the weather. A jumper you bust out when it dips below 25 degrees. Giant eye roll at people who've moved up from down south, even though you're originally from Victoria.
Jumper this week. I was like, oh my God.
Just by chance this week, we've seen the release of 3 big reports, each of them entirely unconnected but vital to the future of this state. Now, between them, they outline the threats to Brisbane's economy, to its climate, and to the trust in the city's institutions. Let's start with the Brisbane City Council's flood report. You'll remember in the final days of February this year, there was an unprecedented rainfall event. About 80% of Brisbane's yearly average rainfall fell in 5 days. More than 23,000 properties were affected by the floods. Now, the council has conceded that there were unreasonable delays in information getting out and will prioritise upgrading its early warning system. The city's Lord Mayor has also said that the predictions by the Bureau of Meteorology were, quote, undercooked, and the report itself offered this evidence. In orange is the Bureau of Meteorology's maximum predicted rainfall. The purple is the actual maximum rainfall, which, as you can see over those key dates, the forecasted level was far below what ended up falling from the sky. The Drum has approached the Bureau for comment on the flood report, which was released 2 days ago, but they were unable to provide a response. Let me start with you, if I can, Jackie, on this one. Just take us through what this flood was like, because every flood is so different. 2011, do you remember? It was blue skies. The rain fell over the catchment, and as you're putting your arms on this river, just up it came on a sunny day. What was this February like?
Well, this February it was just total inundation. Like the Friday and the Sunday, it was just like a curtain of rain fell the entire day. Like a curtain of rain, uninterrupted. It was something I had never seen before. Then, because the ground was so wet and Waivanho had to have releases, then we started seeing the flooding take effect. So it was, I think, unlike 2011, where we did have warnings, where there was a lot of conversation happening, what we had was just inundation that we were, like I was trying to make sense of, people were trying to make sense of it.
And that's a really interesting distinction. In 2011, the rain fell in the catchment. And so there was, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. Ignore the, and that was the big thing for the government to get across to people. Just ignore the blue sky. There is a flood coming. And this time, I think the report is suggesting there's 38 creeks in Brisbane. And those were right up high long before the river flooding system.
But also, to be fair, in 2011, we had a weather system that had raged through the regions all that summer as well. So what we had, by the time it hit Brisbane and the upper Brisbane catchment system, it had already raged through the regions. And the regions like Rockhampton had been flooded, Roma, a whole range of places throughout the regions had already been flooded. So we were on alert. I think what happened in February this year was a Brisbane-specific event.
The event. Greg, you and I were talking earlier. It's really important to make the point that an enormous amount of work was done in Queensland in terms of flood mapping, some of which hadn't been done for a century after that event. The establishment of the Reconstruction Authority, which at the time and probably still is a nation-beating,
world-class
organisation for mitigation and immediately disaster relief. But let's look at what De Jersey, the report author, said. He said, look, not every one of those 38 creeks has got rain gauges in it, and the Bureau of Meteorology is relying on council to find out what's happening with the creeks. So there are kind of cracks in the system. There were also comments about the emergency alert system, that council's got to talk to the state government, who's got to talk to the Foreign Emergency Service before they put out the alert and so on.
Look, it's an issue that was first raised by Justice Holmes when she brought down her eponymous report in 2012 on the 11 floods, and it's been resaid essentially by by the Jersey. Time is everything in these situations. If you're on the eastern side of the Great Divide, and particularly when the Great Divide's close to the coast, these rivers and creeks are very fast running. Time is everything. There's no amount of money, no engineering we can do to save people, save property in that situation. But time is critical to get people out and to save those lives.
Can I just make the point? What you're saying is, if you've got rain falling, and you've got and you're on a floodplain, and it's very close to the mountains, the water just rages.
It does. I mean, if you think back to Grantham, it was 8 inches in half an hour. You had an area width-wise of 1.2 kilometres travelling at 60 k an hour. Now, that's hard to get your head around. We all talk about 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000, but the true sense of the word force majeure, an act of God, comes to mind in these situations. You can't contemplate that. It's just not possible. So what do? You give people the maximum time to get in the car or find a way to higher ground so they're saved. And look, there are some big issues across the state, not just Brisbane, with the interaction with the bomb. We've said for a long time, I've said in my previous life, it's underfunded, and we need really strong protocols around how we decide how flooding is going to occur in towns like Rockhampton and Mackay. It was only 4 years ago that 40,000 people, which is a fair whack, just under half of the city of Mackay was evacuated to high ground, and that was in dispute. Equally, when Townsville had the 2019 floods, it was right, I was actually in the room with the mayor at the time, it was right down to the wire whether they'd have accurate information to decide whether they were going to flood 5,000 houses at the risk of having 15,000 people seriously impacted by the flood.
Just on the Bureau, I mean, they have said we've struggled to get, they can't give us a statement today about this report. And the report notes things like, you know, on the 27th of February, the river flood warnings, there were 5 changes over 11 hours. I mean, there's a rapidly changing situation, right? That has to be acknowledged. But they say they have significant support from government. So what exactly are you saying? I mean, there's not the gauges in all these creeks.
No.
And De Jersey's saying, well, maybe there should be. The Bureau's waiting on the council. And you guys were speaking earlier about there's people who go out in tinnies to go and take the rain gauge.
Yep. Yeah, we've sat in the same room and we've
80-year-olds.
Relied on an 80-year-old to go out in his tinny in close to St George, take a reading and then ring it into the Bureau of Meteorology, and the people
on the landline.
People decide whether we're going to evacuate a town of 1,500. That's literally the state of play. Now, local government spent best part of 40 million after 2/11 with telemetry, radar and rivers, all sorts of things. But it is this interaction that the Jersey goes to between the Bureau of Meteorology and councils, how we collect the data, that there's one point of truth, we don't get confused about what we're looking at, and it's very quick. And we need to know that wherever you are in the state, you're going to get that level of service. So that's the task in front of us. We've got to really work together, and Canberra's got a big role to play in this, making sure that we have an architecture for the whole state, that we have a standard of service and equipment that's up to the challenge, and we can get that information to the people within half an hour to an hour, because that's often all you've got to get people out of harm's way.
And Wes, just interestingly on this, there's a couple of conflicting elements of the report. On one hand, Council has this weather zone app, which will push out alerts to you about what's going on, but only 14% of people in Brisbane have it. On the other hand, more than 10,000 volunteers for the Mud Army never got going because community did it. They were ready to go. So on one hand, really prepared, and the other hand, they haven't got the app.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. After 2011 too, I think there's the idea of community responsibility and getting involved, but how do you actually, as an individual, look after yourself as well is going to be very important. What I love about Brisbane and in these kind of circumstances, and we don't have the monopoly on it, but there is a sense of if there's a problem, you get in there and you sort it out. And you don't have to rely on others. I think there's a strong kind of sense of looking after yourself. And that I think there's a suspicion around apps, a suspicion around who's got your information and who's going on there. And I think that could be playing out along the way as well. I don't know that for truth, but I know my family, no one wants to give their information to anything that looks a bit like a government kind of app or authority. So the sense of relying on your community is so much more important.
Interesting. Another report released this week by the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority has found that 91% of reefs surveyed this year showed signs of bleaching. This would be the 4th mass bleaching event over the past 7 years. The aerial survey swept 2,300 kilometres, finding the worst bleaching between Cape Tribulation and the Whitsundays, which are almost the most visited tourist spots in the marine park. Last year, scientific advisors at UNESCO recommended the reef be listed as in danger, but after the Environment Minister campaigned hard against that, the listing was deferred. 3 years ago, at the Liberal Party campaign launch, Scott Morrison credited his government for, quote, saving the Great Barrier Reef.
We have saved the Great Barrier Reef. Well done to Greg Hunt, particularly, on his work when he was Environment Minister, taking it off the endangered list. And we've invested record funding in researching and protecting its future, thanks to Josh's time as Environment Minister.
You've worked in politics. You worked for Tony Abbott, I think, at one stage in a political career, and you've been in the structure of the National Party. And now you were talking to us about doing drop-off with other mums and dads on the Gold Coast, and with people going, oh, election, who could be bothered? What do you make of that? Of, you know, the Prime... Oh, dear. Huge round of applause for my question. What do you make of that when the Prime Minister says 3 years ago we've saved the Great Barrier Reef, and since then we've seen UNESCO saying, boy, it's in trouble, and now we've got a report 91% bleached?
I really think it's coming back. Every conversation we've had in the last week around the election is people talking about cost of living, petrol prices. It's a really long bow for someone who's under mortgage stress, under rental stress. I think in many regions, in many of the coalition base, to think, well, what's happening in the Whitsundays, that's just for tourists. You know, you said that that stretch is the most visited. And I think, though, that's changing, and we're changing that with the rise of independents across the electorates, who a lot of them are funded by Climate 200, who are saying out and saying that I care about the climate and I care what's going on. But I think there is a real misperception around Conservative voters that they don't care about the environment, and I think that's incorrect. And I think if you look at the base, and particularly a National Party base, we talk about the Great Barrier Reef, and I feel very strongly, and personally very strongly, about the health of the Great Barrier Reef, because I've got young children, I care about the environment. It makes me quite a moderate Conservative. But equally, we've got something like the Murray-Darling Basin, which crosses 3 states of our country, massive swathes of land, massive community, and a massive environmental impact. And we're not talking about that. So does that come back to the problem around what's being spoken about in the media, or what's being spoken about on social media, that, you know, we're focused, and I'm not negating the Great Barrier Reef at all, but we're focused. That's something that's exciting to talk about, and it's a soundbite. But what about all of the other things that we need to consider as a community, in our own local communities, in our own homes?
Jackie, can I go to you? It's extraordinary to go back to the last campaign launch. The Prime Minister says we've saved the Great Barrier Reef, and in the interim, as I say, we've seen UNESCO say we need to list this as endangered. Australia pushed back very hard against that, and now we have this report. The release of which I think was delayed a little bit because there was some concern that the release of it would breach caretaker conventions once the election was called. Your reflections on all of that?
Well, Ellen, as a senior Queensland government minister who travelled to UNESCO in 2015 to argue against the listing of the Great Barrier Reef on the in danger UNESCO listing, at the time I understood that UNESCO took the decision in large part because the Queensland government came into power on a suite of policies that would deal with water quality, containing port development along the Great Barrier Reef, prohibiting dredge spoil spill, and acting on climate change. So there was a whole suite of policies there. And I went with Greg Hunt at the time, who was the Environment Minister, and we pledged to do this. Now, I am concerned, as I think most Australians are, to see the constant bleaching effect of climate change and ocean acidification on the Great Barrier Reef. And I think that Sally makes some good points, but something I will, with respect, take issue with is saying that this is a niche issue. It's not a niche issue. The Murray-Darling Basin is not a niche issue. The protection of our environment and ensuring that we're using resources not only for our economy and for jobs, which are critical, and the Great Barrier Reef actually does create so many thousands of jobs in this nation, that managing the environment for our economy responsibly, but also for the legacy, for the benefit it gives our nation and our children. That is critical and important. It's not niche, it's central from my perspective. So I think there's a lot of questions. I want to know what happened to the $400 million plus that was given to the Great Barrier Reef without a tender process by the Morrison, the foundation, without a tender process. What outcomes have we seen in the 3 years since that money has been given to that foundation? What benefit has been flown on? Is there enough money going to science to rehabilitate coral? I noticed from the media reports that some of the coral bleaching is not fatal. The coral is recovering. Can we accelerate this recovery? I know that Professor Tim Flannery has done some fantastic work around seaweed farming close to the Great Barrier Reef to drop ocean acidification. What are we doing in the innovation and science space to save the coral? That's something that we need to ask ourselves.
Well, the state government has kicked off a formal inquiry into cultural issues with the Queensland Police Force. The Women's Safety and Justice Report was delivered to the government at the end of last year, finding a widespread and negative culture in police undermined their efforts in this area. Originally, the Police Commissioner, Katarina Carroll, and the Police Union had been dismissive of the need for such an investigation, with the Union President Ian Levers describing the report as woke. But they were now cooperating with the inquiry. Wes, can I start with you? This is an interesting one. The terms of reference for this inquiry look at whether there are any cultural issues with the Queensland Police Service that negatively affect police investigations of domestic and family violence, and if there are any cultural issues, whether they have contributed to the overrepresentation of First Nations people in the criminal justice. You've got a brother who's a copper.
Yeah. And I think that, when he and I have a bit of a conversation, I know that he's exposed to some of the worst parts of our society, and his job is to protect them and the community from this kind of behaviour. And I think anything, I see him go, anything he can do to make the community safer, he will do. And it's that terrible kind of dilemma that he's often called in at the worst moments, after something's occurred, rather than the kind of preventative moments. And let's say for a First Nations person, often we're talking about issues that stem from the effects of colonisation, and we're talking about the discrimination and prejudice and how they've formed in people's lives, and kind of people acting out against those things. And so what is the role of the police to control a community, to keep them safe? And it's a very hard job. I'm not here to hit the police with a big stick. I actually think they're doing a really hard job. I think what we need to do is look at the preventative measures. We need to look at a much bigger conversation. And I think we should do anything we can to make women and families as safe as they can. And I think the police have to kind of take that on board. I think they do. And for me, I go, we often talk about these symptoms, these end products of something that we don't look at. What is the preventative measures? What are the source of these kind of disquiets in our community? And I think that racism and colonisation have really had an effect on our First Nations people. And we don't know necessarily how to change that. And we have for decades been saying, this is how we can do it. This is how we can do it. And just recently, the whole idea of a voice to Parliament going, actually, we can help you reshape the debate, reshape the conversation, and it gets dismissed so quickly. And for me, I go, yeah, you want to deal with police, locking up people, but you don't want to actually deal with the cause of it all. And I want to deal with that more.
Sally, you grew up with domestic and family violence, and this report talks about the way in which victims are let down, and the way in which sometimes police and authorities misunderstand who's the victim and who's the perpetrator, with kind of disastrous consequences. Do you want to share what your experience was?
Of course, and I agree. I really support the work of police. I think particularly community policing, particularly policing that's done in rural and regional communities. I grew up in a wonderful, tiny rural community, nowhere near a regional level. And we had family issues, and I think just after Mother's Day it's so important to be speaking about this, because if 1 in 6 mothers or 1 in 6 women experience intimate abuse. Mother's Day, we should have been shouting this from the rooftops, not just talking about flowers and breakfast in bed. We should be talking about the issues that really affect women and men, because I know that intimate and domestic violence happens from both sexes. But in a rural or a tiny little community, there might not be a police person in that community. It might be 21 kilometres away. It might be 50 kilometres away. They're a long phone call away. And equally, they might be really, well, in a small country town where, you know, the police person might play a sport with a perpetrator, or because there's very little opportunities for formal socialising, they might be drinking at the pub on a Friday night with the perpetrator, who then goes home and commits these acts of violence.
And was that your experience?
Well, our experience is that we had an intervention order against my father, and my father was a farmer, and so he had weapons and firearms because he used them on the farm to control pest and rodents. So part of the orders was that he had no firearms. And the local police person went and visited and served the orders and said, you know, it came back, and Mum's lawyer was told that he would keep firearms, my father would keep firearms because he needed them for his farm work. But they were still high. One of them was a high-powered hunting rifle.
And did that make you afraid as a child, as a teenager? I was 14. I
was afraid. I think my mother was really afraid. And the other thing is that a lot of people will see this, and I come from a small country town, they'll be very proud that I'm on TV. There will be people watching it and they think, but what a great bloke he was. And it's something that we don't speak about openly, but there was fear in my household growing up, and there was fear from my mother, who knew that the police person was a friend of the family, so what action would be taken. And that was 30 years ago, but things have not changed. It is still hard to be a rural police person, I think. The pressures are so great. And there's also the society and the cultural and the friendship and the social pressures as well. So unfortunately, I know this is still happening in small country towns, and we know that's happening in 1 in 6 households. So it's important to speak about.
Thank you so much for sharing that story.
Yeah. Pleasure.
There was a third debate between Mr Albanese and Mr Morrison last night. The pundits variously described them as nervous, civil, and that it was essentially a draw. Cost of living, as Sally has said, the buzz phrase, with the mince and steak argument pushed by the opposition leader, and economic competence pitch from the Prime Minister.
What sort of pay rise do workers deserve?
If you just say 5.1%, that puts Australia's economy at great risk.
If the increase is less than the inflation rate, they'll be getting a real wage cut.
The Fair Work Commission is the right place to do that, because the economy needs stability and it needs certainty.
They deserve better than that.
What are you going to do to ensure that families can make ends meet?
Our measures on childcare, for example.
We cut fuel tax in half.
When your youngest child goes into kindergarten, all of a sudden families are better off.
$250 to pensioners and others on fixed incomes.
Our energy policy will reduce electricity prices by $275.
Increased tax relief from the 1st of July.
You are smashing out those talking points. When will you bring your bill for an integrity commission before the Parliament?
If we can ensure that our bill can be passed, then I'm very happy to bring it forward.
This is the most wasteful government in Australia's history.
This is a Labor leader who comes from the far left of the party.
Waste and rorts is something that has characterised this government.
He's a loose unit when it comes to the economy.
Surely everybody has one redeeming feature, don't they?
The thing about Anthony that I've always admired is that he's never forgot where he's come from.
Scott's absolutely committed to his nation, and I admire that.
But, you know, to do this job, you need to know your stuff. You need to be across the detail.
There you go, you can be positive.
I must have misunderstood the question.
Greg, that was the highlights package. I think that was that's probably the best way to watch it for a lot of people. There's been a bit of debate around this idea of Anthony Albanese backing a 5.1% pay increase that I think works out for those being paid $20.33 at about $1.03 an hour. And we see employer groups saying that they're okay with a pay increase between 2.5% to 3.7%, but there's a suggestion that Mr Albanese is being irresponsible in pushing that, and it could have an inflationary effect. How does that sound to Queensland ears?
I think it's really, towards the end of the campaign, a breakthrough issue. When Labor's come to power in Australia, it's always had a big central issue, whether it was Whitlam or Hawke or Rudd. In Rudd's case, people always talk about Kevin 07, but they forget work choices. A lot of what happened was a reaction to work choices. That element wasn't apparent in this campaign.
And that was an issue about industrial relation and how secure your employment was.
And if you think about Queensland, where the coalition has 24 of the 30 seats, and probably will certainly have at least 20 or more after the election, for them, the Labor Party to break through, and particularly in the regions where they are still fairly industrialised, it's either Australian Workers' Union or the industrial left, I would call it, out of the sugar mills and manufacturing, or in the outer burbs around southeast Queensland, that will bite. I mean, the fact that it's been made binary, where Albanese has said, Prime Minister, are you saying people will have to get further behind because they can't have a pay rise that matches inflation? That is a very difficult proposition for Morrison to back. So I think the last week it'll be critical in people's minds as they switch on that, you know, my standard of living, the cost of living, and a one-off cost of CPI rise in wages is a fundamental issue to a lot of people.
Oh, so you think it's a breakthrough issue?
I do. I mean, it's not going to mean that suddenly Labor wins 15 seats in Queensland, but I do think that they weren't able to break through. I couldn't see the issue. There was annoyance. There were people who were grumpy with the Prime Minister and various other issues, but I couldn't see that issue. I believe he's crystallised it. Whether it was purposeful or it happened at this time, it is one of those issues people will be talking about in the pubs and the clubs and around coffee tables.
Jackie, the newspapers are saying that there's a prospect that even though Labor only holds, 6 out of 30 seats in Queensland, that it may not pick up any more. Federal Labor may finish this election still without a seat outside the southeast of the state.
Well, this is all commentary, and as Sally knows, there's a hell of a lot of commentary that happens in the lead up to polling day.
But what are you hearing?
But, well, I'm hearing that there's a lot of tight contests in Queensland, not just in southeast Queensland, but outside the southeast Queensland corner. You know, there are some...
like beyond Leichhardt, based on Cairns, beyond Flynn.
Well, Leichhardt is one. Flynn obviously is another.
Bundaberg, is it?
Yeah. So, you know, and Bundaberg, what you've got is an ex-LNP person running as an independent in Hinkler, sorry. So, you know, there are some tight competitions here. But I think Greg is absolutely correct around the cost of living issue and wage growth. And picking up on Sally's point before, this is no longer an esoteric conversation. We've had interest rate increases in the last week. People are not just feeling like they can't keep up, they're actually doing the calculations now around mortgage repayments and what happens if their pay packet doesn't keep up. Like, people are actually doing these now, calculations now, so it's no longer an esoteric argument, and they are looking at the leaders around who will actually guarantee that they don't continue to fall behind. And Albanese is the only leader at this election who actually has a plan or actually has a commitment, a policy and philosophical commitment to Australian workers not to let them fall behind.
And we will come to Sally's views on that. She may well have a different view. But first, can I go to you, Wes? Teal is not a colour in Queensland.
No.
There's no teal independent. You're all laughing. You're all laughing. Look at you all going, David. No.
There's a lot of yellow. There's not sunshine days, but there's a lot of yellow.
Right.
But also the UAP, also First Nation. I mean, that's where its heartland is here as well, I think. So, you know, when people also talk about the Greens as a kind of big force, you go, well, in some seats, yeah, sure, Greens are a big force.
But that's the only choice if teal is a combination of the colours blue and green, the only choice in the inner city here, it would seem, for the two seats that are in play, it would seem, Brisbane and Ryan, both held by the LNP, would be kind of the king-making vote of the Greens. That would be the choice, rather than, I mean, that would be the alternate choice to Liberal and Labor, as opposed to in southern states you've got this teal choice.
Agreed. And I think that...
But why not here?
Oh, I don't
Why
know.
are you laughing, all of you?
Well, I don't know about... Well, other people might have a better opinion. I don't think that's... The teal independent, for me, has seemed to be against the Liberals, have been very strongly kind of against the Liberal position, mostly around climate change, mostly around, and I think that Labor in Queensland in particular has been very strong on the kind of climate change action and things on a state level. So I think that there's not been a kind of, I'm conflating things now, that the state and the federal politics haven't landed in such a way that a teal is the most important thing.
That's a funny analysis, though, because in New South Wales they've done extraordinary. I mean, they've got an extraordinary consensus on dealing with, you know, getting renewables into the energy system and closing coal-fired power stations. And yet you got, you know, you can't go to the supermarket without running into a teal candidate. You know.
I think, you know, and I think Queenslanders, we love to have one party in the state and another party in the feds, and so we love that kind of, that competition has been there for a very long time. So the Teals haven't kind of, the independents have been part of that, and I think a lot of that independent energy has gone to One Nation and the UAP. I mean, you drive down through Cleveland and stuff where I am now, and all those massive yellow billboards promising things I don't even know what they mean, you know, promising things that make no sense, you know, about house and or what does freedom even mean?
Right.
So I think that's where a lot of that kind of independent feel has gone.
And Sally, former State Director of the Victorian National Party, so put that hat on for me. And I saw that Cathy McGowan, you know, the kind of this generation's original independent conservative, in a rural area, has said, look, the LNP, National Party, Liberal Party down south, have kind of mishandled this in the sense that there's a perception that the Teals in the country areas, who may not be supported by Climate 200, Simon Holmes Accord, are actually community people. It's a community movement, and that demonising them has been the wrong response. What's your view of that?
I feel really strongly that politics is personal and politics is local, and I've had the great benefit and joy of working in these regional communities and seeing how active and engaged they are in their politics and in their local politics. So I don't think we can ever underestimate a good local candidate who has good local connections and has a real passion and a fire for their own local community.
And so, do you think they're fakes and stooges and anti-Liberal groupies?
Look, I'm sure that there are some fakes and stooges and anti-Liberal groupies, but I'm sure that's not the case for all of them. That's a broad brush to paint. I've also dealt with a lot of independents over the years and can see some real power in independence, but I have to say I do worry what will happen if there's a big group of, because anyone who's been in a parliament situation knows how hard it is to get an I on top of a dot on top of an I, or a T on top, a cross on top of the T. It's almost as difficult as that sentence was to say. It's more difficult than that.
But isn't it the National Party who make that difficult for the Liberal Party, and don't they see that as their job? I mean, that's just how coalitions work. Any coalition's fractious. We could talk to Jackie about the factions in the Labor Party. It's fractious, right? What's the difference?
I think there's still a lot of soft votes, even with 9 sleeps to go until an election. There is still a lot of softness around the areas, and an hour, as we know, is a long... People say a day's a long time in politics. Don't give me a day, give me an hour and things can change like that. I think that, you know, I wonder about policy and how policy's costed, and if you say you're going to do this, if you say you're going to do housing loans for 4%, how are you going to do that? What are you going to do? That's a UAP, not a
Is
teal.
this a conversation you're having on the Gold Coast? Do people want to have this conversation with you in this election?
Well, I think the Gold Coast, I always say this because
In community, put it that way.
Because I came from Victoria, Victoria is a coalition that is a very different structure from the LNP. And they are almost worlds apart in many regards, in structure regards and in agreement regards. And so it's very different. So in somewhere like Goldstein or somewhere like Indi, where Cathy was and where Bridget, I know that she's reacting to some comments that Bridget McKenzie made, and independence, there's a strong tradition of people in the communities putting up their hands and saying enough is enough, or I want to see change. Very different, I think, to here, because, as you said, we in Queensland, we've got Palmer United, we've got First Nations, so there's a very different history of independence here. I'm not hearing about it in the school drop-off at this stage.
They want to talk about it at all?
No one wants to talk about it. People are fatigued, and I think that's where the soft votes come from. On the back of a global pandemic, there has been so much change and shift and trauma and angst, and so many people watching media press conferences, like their daily press conference, that would never have watched a political press conference. People are fatigued. They're fatigued about the debates. They're fatigued about, oh my God, that's why pre-polling's so high, is because people don't want to go and get their democracy sausage. I want my democracy sausage. I want to feel a vibe on the day, but think people are fatigued.
Well, on Sunday next week, we should know who our Prime Minister will be and which MPs will be representing us. But what might take a little longer to know is the result of the Senate race, which we'll also be voting on next week. The drum scouter Ali explains how the voting for the Senate will work this time and why it's equally as important as the House of Reps.
Over the last few weeks, there has been a lot of talk of who our Prime Minister might be or who will win what seat. But it can be easy to forget that we're also voting for the Senate. The Senate is the House of the States and acts as a check on government, scrutinising bills, government administration and government policy in general. At the moment, no one party has a majority in the Senate, so sometimes deals have to be made with other parties to get things over the line. In this election, alongside the House of Representatives, there will be a half-Senate election. This means 6 of the 12 senators who represent each state, and both from the ACT and Northern Territory, are up for election. Before 2016, you used to be able to just vote one above the line. And if you did, your preference would be decided for you by the group that you voted for, usually after political parties had struck deals with one another. But now, it's up to you. This time you can either number at least 6 boxes from 1 to 6 above the line for parties or groups, or number at least a dozen from 1 to 12 below the line for individual candidates. But most people vote above the line. To win a Senate spot, a candidate must reach a certain number of votes, or a quota. For example, if Party A wins enough votes in Queensland to fill 3 quotas, that's 3 Senate seats. After the primary votes are counted, preferences are distributed to work out who has the most support to fill the quotas that are left. This distribution is complicated and can get candidates into the Senate even if they don't meet the quota from primary votes. Here's how it works. If your preferred candidate gets more votes than they need to be elected and there are still spots up for grabs, those extra votes will be redistributed to other candidates according to how you've numbered your ballot. If there are still spots to fill, then the candidate with the fewest votes at each stage of the count gets eliminated, with the votes for them transferred to the next candidate you've numbered. This redistribution keeps happening until all spots are filled, so a candidate could ride on a wave of redistribution till they get a spot. Counting for the Senate takes longer than the House of Representatives, so it will take weeks before all senators are declared elected.
OK, Jackie, this is interesting. The 6th Senate spot in Queensland is one of the wonders of the world, the natural world. Perhaps the most interesting contest.
Should be on the endangered list.
You think? So it's a contest between the LNP might pick up a 3rd Senate spot, but she's up against Pauline Hanson, Clive Palmer and the former LNP Premier Campbell Newman, who did an interview on Rockhampton Radio the other day urging people to vote for him, even though he acknowledged openly people did not like him.
Yep.
What will happen?
Well, I think it's going to be a dog's breakfast, that 6th position. I mean, I think that it will come down to, I think, the essentially the flow-through of preferences. And we've seen how you've got preference whisperers in the past and particular modelling that has been done in order to advantage smaller parties like, I don't know that this has happened, but I'll put UAP up there. Obviously, Clive Palmer has been very public and vocal about his support for Campbell Newman. So there's no doubt that there will be some electoral flow through there to Campbell Newman. So it's going to be interesting to see. I don't think that our state or our nation, and I come to this with bias perspective, will be well suited or well served by Campbell Newman in the Senate. I think we saw the damage that he did in Queensland when he ruthlessly sacked so many workers and ground our economy down. And quite frankly, I don't think he deserves a second chance in the Australian Senate.
Would you prefer Pauline, Clive or the LNP?
Well, you know, Labor's running quite a few. But, look, it's going to be interesting to see, but I share Greg's analysis. It will take a long time to determine that final sixth position.
Yeah. Greg, we're nearly out of time. It's interesting. What happens? We started the program talking about 1 million people coming to Southerners, lovely Southerners, yeah? Coming to Brisbane, coming to South East Queensland, right over the state in the next 5 years. Does Queensland change the Southerners, or do the Southerners change Queensland politically?
I think because of what Wes had said before about the history, the geography, the climate, we change the Southerners. I mean, that's my long experience. I've been one of those people that left in the 80s as part of the diaspora that left and then came back in the 90s. I think the Queensland position is different. Our history, our geography, the fact we've got 10 provincial cities with more than 100,000 people, it's hard to get people from other parts of Australia to understand that. And it throws up these big characters. It's not just now. I mean, Queensland's the only state that's ever had a properly elected communist member of parliament. Right. In Bowen, Fred Patterson. So look, it's that sort of place. I mean, these larger-than-life bobcatters. I think some of the mayors that are running this time round for the federal seats in Andrew Wilcox in Dawson and Matty Burnett in Flynn, they bring that with them. People know them. They know their values. They know their track record. It's that sort of place. The bigger, the better. If you've got half a missing ear or you've had a bit of bark knocked off you, that makes you just like us. So I think it's the sort of place that if you've got profile, if you've got character and that you stand for something, then people are more than likely going to say, oh, yeah, I'll vote for him or her.
Why not? Final word, Wes. How do migrants to this place, and take this, you know, today, last year, post-pandemic, way back at first contact, colonisation, invasion, become infused with the sense of history and place that's here?
How do they do it? I mean, I think too, just the idea that we only have one House of Parliament in the state means something very different, and it's history. Why do we only have one? We don't have an upper house. And how do we actually talk about who we are, where we are? And we're not scared of a good old kind of protest vote too. Okay. You know, if we're going to slap someone down, you can feel us all kind of pile on because we go, oh yeah, no, and so you get this kind of sense of the Campbell Newman wave in and wave out, because you go, that's the nature of who we are and the way we debate and discuss things. We're all or nothing, I think. All or nothing.
Wonderful discussion today. If you've been affected by anything we've been discussing in the show tonight, call Lifeline 13 11 14 or 1800 RESPECT, 1800 737 730. That's all we have time for tonight. Thanks so much to our panel, to Wes, to Sally, Greg and Jackie Trad's in as well. Catherine Robinson's with you tomorrow night. Have a wonderful evening. Stay dry.
Empathy training, and have you ever had it?
No, I haven't, Lee.
Can you please stand back a bit? Thank you.
Wasn't it a serious conflict of interest getting involved in any way in that grand process?
It's not just about whether it's within the rules, it's about the way it looks.
Lifting wages will have an impact.
Yeah, but how do you lift wages?
There are 9 ministers for housing in this country. What are they all doing? 1,000 jobs.
Address the question.
Now is the time to speak.
7:30, Monday to Thursday, ABC TV and ABC iView.
For the latest on the federal election, go to ABC News Digital.
Policy announcements and how they impact you.
Profiles of every electorate, including yours.
Anthony Green's guide to the key seats.
You Ask, We Answer is back, and you can see what other Australians are asking.
There's our new Get Ready to Vote checklist, plus live blogs and notifications so you won't miss a thing.
For election news that matters to you, go to abc.net.au/Australia Votes or download the ABC News app.
Board shorts. They're quick drying, designed by surfers for surfers.
Buddy and I would like to buy the license to sell Light Wave in the US.
You two stole all of my contacts, and you went into business without me.
Did you know he was carrying the drugs?
What have you done?
He's falling apart in there.
We're gonna make it up to him.
Barons, Sunday 8:30 on ABC TV or stream the series on ABC iView.
Gruen Nation is back.
Separating the ScoMos from the elbows, you can call me Ando, but not Undo.
Cutting through the clutter of election advertising.
To prove he won't be a PM that turns everything into a photo shoot, Elbows appeared in a series of photo shoots. If he loses the election, Tara Cash just found their next model.
Gruen Nation.
Oh, I know what I'm voting for in the Hottest 100!
Wednesday at 8 on ABC TV and ABC iView. May 21, Australia decides.
Together we can build a better future.
Strong economy means a stronger future.
Who will be our next PM?
Because we're backing you.
Australians deserve better.
Join Australia's best political minds as we bring you live results seat by seat.
Lost 1 or 2 seats to independents.
Can the coalition go a 4th term, or will Labor rise to power? Australia votes. Saturday, May 21 on ABC, or live stream on ABC iView.
How about you come on a journey with us?
You with me, guys?
Let's conquer the world.
Wow.
I decided to stand up last night, and I'll continue to stand up.
We'll be braver and smarter and stronger in love.
Who is brave? Yes.
We'll be seekers and finders and rise to the top.
We're all okay, and we're going to be okay.
I'm getting quite emotional.
Gets your heart racing.
Turned into such a crier.
We're going to understand racism. You are pioneers.
I'm on my quest for true love.
Nearly $6 billion in the bank. Mark McGowan delivers a budget bonanza for WA. The minimum wage debate continues to dominate as the federal election campaign approaches its final week. Russian wreckage as the troops retreat. Ghost towns near Chernobyl reveal new scars.
And coming up on the business, a so-called stable crypto coin crashes, wiping out billionaires and ordinary people's savings.
Good evening, Michael Tetlow with ABC Late News. Western Australia has recorded another massive budget surplus, with the state nearly $6 billion in the black for the second year running. On a day where WA recorded more than 16,000 new COVID cases, Mark McGowan's budget boosts health spending by billions. The Premier says the budget centrepiece is cost of living relief, with households to be given a $400 credit on their power bill.
There we go. Almost $6 billion reasons to smile.
This is another strong budget that helps set Western Australia up for a bright future beyond the pandemic.
Fuelled by sky-high iron ore revenue, WA is continuing to enjoy enormous budget surpluses, with the state expected to be $5.7 billion in the black this financial year, just shy of the record set last year. And there's also large surpluses forecast for the next 4 years.
We are in one of the best financial positions in the world.
In his second budget as Treasurer, Mark McGowan says he is focused on helping households manage the rising cost of living as consumer prices surge. Households are set to get a $400 power bill credit from July, costing the budget nearly $500 million.
At a time of real pressure at the Bowser and at the checkout, my WA Labor government is delivering real relief.
But some household fees and charges are going up. Electricity and water bills will rise by 2.5% from July 1, while the emergency services levy will increase by 5%. Despite those hikes, with the power bill credit, the average household will pay 3.8% less in government charges next financial year. The opposition says the government hasn't gone far enough.
There is wealth in this state. It's clearly there. The budget surplus is eye-watering, but it's not being shared with the people of Western Australia.
With the hospital system under serious strain amid a growing COVID wave, the government is boosting health spending by nearly $2.5 billion in a bid to ease that pressure. much of which was announced ahead of the budget.
My government is committed to providing the quality healthcare Western Australians deserve right across this state.
Other major spending commitments include $1.3 billion to diversify the economy, $652 million to tackle climate change, and $350 million for remote communities. There will also be land tax and stamp duty discounts for some properties in a bid to boost housing supply. Despite the strong surpluses, government debt will actually increase over the next 4 years. It'll dip to $29.9 billion this year, then go back up to $33.9 billion by the middle of the decade. The tight construction market will also mean some cost blowouts for major developments, including some Metronet projects, while the airport rail line appears set to be delayed again.
James Carmody reporting. Anthony Albanese has clarified his stance on the minimum wage, narrowing the number of workers he believes should get a pay rise in line with inflation. The Labor leader says he was referring to the near 200,000 lowest paid workers, not to 2.5 million others whose pay is pegged to the minimum wage. The Prime Minister's facing his own irritations over a captain's pick candidate and a near run-in with an angry ex-diplomat. Here's political editor Andrew Probyn.
This close to election day, leaders go where the fight's tight. Anthony Albanese on the hunt in the Queensland seat of Flynn.
Just watch your head.
Scott Morrison in Bass, Tasmania, seeking to shore up support in his most marginal seat.
The whole environment that you're trying to operate in.
With a mental health commitment close to his colleague's heart.
I have anxiety and panic disorders and having a bit of a panic attack when I walked in here this morning, so I'm in the right place.
Bridget Archer deftly handling awkward questions about a Liberal hopeful's transphobic campaign.
LGBTIQ community members are some 15 times more likely to suffer mental health challenges. I think we all should be very mindful of that.
But it's the stoush over wages that lives on, including in the final leaders' debate.
The idea that 2 cups of coffee a day is something that would damage the economy is, I believe, just not the case.
A 5%, 0.1% increase, you may be trying to walk it back now, that would push up inflation.
A shiny prop even carried over from the night before.
$1.
Whether those people on the minimum wage in Australia get $1.
Don't let him near the till, because he doesn't know how much things cost.
Mr Albanese has backed a 5.1% increase to the minimum wage, which is paid to 184,000 workers. The wages of 2.5 million others are pegged to the minimum wage. The Labor leader today clarifying it's not them he has in mind.
What I am talking about here is people who are on $20.33 an hour, that the federal government says they should have their real wage cut.
He has had 3 positions on the one thing on one day. He knows he got that wrong.
The longer this campaign goes, the harder it is to see a path to victory for Scott Morrison. National polling confirms the PM is facing a double threat, not only from an increasingly confident Labor Party, but Teal independents who could be on the verge of snatching a seat or two from inner-city Liberals. The Prime Minister reminded of another trouble at a Tasmanian cheese shop.
We have lost the plot in the South Pacific.
A former High Commissioner to the Solomon Islands prevented from giving the PM a gobful over his handling of the Pacific relationship. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
And Labor's accused Scott Morrison of actively encouraging the controversial Darwin Port deal. It says documents show when the Prime Minister was Treasurer, he approved a multi-million-dollar incentive payment to the Northern Territory government to privatise the port.
The decision to lease the Darwin port to a Chinese-owned company in 2015 continues to be the focus of rancorous political debate.
You allowed it to happen?
No, we didn't. The federal government had absolutely no authority over that sale whatsoever.
Landbridge paid $506 million to the former NT-CLP government in return for a 99-year lease over the strategic maritime asset. At the time, the deal was given the all-clear by national security agencies. But Labor says Scott Morrison, who was Treasurer at the time, should have done more to block the lease. Instead, the opposition claims he actively encouraged it.
Scott Morrison signs off an agreement, signs this agreement, in fact, and there's his signature there, in 2016, effectively providing a sweetener, encouragement and incentive.
The incentive payment was part of a federal program designed to encourage state and territory governments to privatise assets and reinvest the funds in new infrastructure. The opposition says these Commonwealth documents show $19.5 million was promised to the NT government for the privatisation of the Port of Darwin, in an arrangement signed off by Scott Morrison 6 months after the facility was leased.
He still fails to take responsibility for the fact that he put money on the table to sweeten the deal for the NT government.
The ABC has sought comment from the coalition but is yet to receive a response. Last year, amid rising tensions with China, the federal government initiated a new national security review of the port deal. While the review hasn't been made public, the Prime Minister has previously said he's received no advice to revoke the lease. Jono Gibson, ABC News.
Efforts are underway to clear landmines laid by Russian troops as they retreated from the Chernobyl exclusion zone in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin's army destroyed infrastructure and stole property during their occupation of the defunct power plant. But in doing so, they may have been exposed to dangerous levels of radiation. Europe correspondent Nick Dole reports from Chernobyl.
The drive into Chernobyl was eerie before the war, but now there's a whole new layer of horrors. The gates, once visited by curious tourists, look to be the scene of a firefight. As we drive towards the number 4 reactor, the site of one of the world's worst nuclear incidents, there are more signs of the Russian forces that took up position here. They'd invaded from nearby Belarus and found themselves on a site that they were hopelessly unprepared for. Over here is where some Russian soldiers have dug their trenches. This is highly contaminated land and it shouldn't have been disturbed. It's certainly not safe to go walking in there, but this is where some Russian soldiers have spent days, if not weeks.
These occupying soldiers could have received a high dose of radiation on their bodies, which will give them health problems for the rest of their lives. So their lifespan will depend on how long they have spent in these trenches.
The International Atomic Energy Agency says there's more than 4 times the radiation in the disturbed trenches as there is on nearby ground, but it's still within the safe range. Ukrainian officials say some of the Russians who occupied the facility handled highly radioactive substances during their month-long occupation. But the town of Pripyat, abandoned in the wake of the 1986 disaster, went mostly undisturbed. The famous fairground still sits idle, surrounded by decaying hotels reserved for the guests that will never come. Pripyat would have to be one of the most unlivable places on Earth, so it's perhaps no surprise that Russian soldiers didn't waste much time here. The buildings here are empty shells and there are none of the comforts soldiers might have been looking for. They did take out the mobile phone towers and then they essentially moved on. They were more interested in Chernobyl itself, a town where it's safe enough to live, but only for a couple of weeks at a time. The workers here do shifts while they service the nuclear site. Engineer Alexander Skirta was on duty when the Russians arrived. He says they looted constantly, and what they couldn't take, they seemed determined to break.
We were very worried about what could happen. This is Chernobyl, a nuclear power plant. It's dangerous.
Even in Russia's retreat, the destruction continued. The bridges were blown on the way back to Belarus to stop the Ukrainians giving chase. Whatever radiation they were exposed to could take years to catch up with them. Nick Dole, ABC News, Chernobyl.
The Fremantle Dockers could be without Nathan O'Driscoll for several weeks, with the young midfielder battling a foot complaint. But while he was absent from training, a big name was on the track as he eyes an AFL return.
The captain is back. For the first time since March, Nat Fyfe joined his Dockers teammates for training. The dual Brownlow medalist closing in on an AFL return. Coach Justin Longmuir confident Fyfe has a spot in the midfield despite the outstanding form of recruit Will Brodie.
Now Brodie loved it off the boot. That's a goal to Fremantle.
A lot of teams have two big-bodied mids in their team. There's opportunity for both of them to rotate forward and bring their aerial presence to the game as well.
Fremantle has made 3 omissions for the trip to the Gold Coast. Sam Switkowski out with concussion, while Michael Walters is isolating. Luke Ryan has been named in an extended squad, despite training away from the group as he battles an ankle injury.
But we've got a 9-day break and we've still got a fair bit of time between now and game day. So, yeah, we'll give him every opportunity to come up.
The news isn't as good for Nathan O'Driscoll, who has a foot injury. West Coast will welcome back Alex Witherden and Bailey Williams for Sunday's clash with reigning premiers Melbourne. The pair named as part of an extended squad, including Jackson Nelson, Hugh Dixon and Greg Clark. Both sides will name their final teams on Friday. Tom Wildey, ABC News.
Australia has been awarded hosting rights for the 2027 Men's and 2029 Women's Rugby World Cups. It'll be the 3rd time Australia's hosted the men's event after co-hosting the first tournament with New Zealand back in 1987. It then won sole rights in 2003. The 2027 tournament is expected to generate nearly $3 billion for the national economy. But it's still unclear where the final will be held, with Sydney, Melbourne and Perth all boasting venues that can seat more than the required 60,000 fans. Nine degrees in Perth tonight before a shower or two and a top of 19 tomorrow. A partly cloudy day ahead for both Darwin and Adelaide. Early fog and 17 for Hobart. A possible shower and 19 degrees in Melbourne. Showers should ease for Canberra. Sydney looking at a rainy day with a top of 22. Rain too for Brisbane with 23 degrees. And that's ABC Lake News to the moment. I'm Michael Tetley. Thanks very much for your company. Stay with us now for the business.
Welcome to The Business. I'm Elise Morgan. Coming up on the program, the inflation situation, skyrocketing living costs and rising rates spook markets, but is it all ado about nothing?
Unemployment's 3.6%. The US economy is creating 400,000 jobs a month. In normal times, we'd call that a boom.
And what the heck's happened? A so-called stable crypto coin crashes, wiping out billionaires and ordinary people's savings.
What we have seen is nothing short of carnage. It's quite horrible to watch.
The crypto market has been shattered in the last couple of days. One coin, Luna, is down 97%, and it was meant to be one of the good ones. Cryptos have been on the slide for a while. Here's a look at Bitcoin, down 56% over the past 6 months. Now, that's largely because of falling confidence that the tech sector will continue to outperform, and rising rates are also offering more enticing places for cash. However, what's happened this week is completely different. The collapse in Luna and the huge falls it set off for other coins was the result of a massive and opportunistic trade. Now let's take a look at some of the falls first. In the last 24 hours, Luna has been almost wiped out. Avalanche down 34%. Now the trade was apparently carried out by one hedge fund, exploiting a weakness in the way the crypto market is constructed to make off like a bandit. To explain what's happened, Lisa Wade, CEO with Digital X, a digital asset fund manager, joined me. Lisa Wade, thank you for your time. In the simplest terms, why has Luna crashed?
So Luna has crashed because it's attached to a stable coin called UST. And basically, as the stablecoin UST gets sold off, more Luna gets minted. And so it has crashed because the stablecoin was part of a trade and has disconnected from its peg. And I appreciate that's very technical.
So what is a stablecoin? Because that name seems fairly ironic now, given what we've seen.
A stablecoin, in essence, is what we call an on-ramp into crypto. So it's a token that represents one Australian, or in this case, US dollar, and people use them as savings pools and a way to be in Web 3.0, but not own actual cryptos. And generally, they are supposed to be safe.
Just to break it down a little bit, what exactly was the mechanics of it? What actually happened in this trade? They bought a huge amount of this stable coin. Then what happens? What did they do? How did they make money? And why did it make Luna crash?
Yeah, okay, so that's why I call it evil genius, because there are so many moving parts to it. I'll try and simplify it so it doesn't get overly complicated. So yes, the first step was to buy the UST. They waited till a Saturday night when the volumes were very low and there were no bids, and then they went into a trading pool and started selling UST in massive volumes, which then triggered all of the subsequent selling in a low volume market. That broke the peg. The selling starts to feed on itself from the mechanics of the algorithm. Luna was impacted because Luna is the underlying of the UST, and it's linked in a way that every time a UST is bought, a Luna is burnt. That means there's less tokens in supply, so the Luna price goes up. The reverse applies when people start selling. So every time someone sells a UST, they mint a Luna, which means there's more volume, and if there's no buyers, then the price goes down. Then it starts to feed on itself because people start panicking and selling Luna. And I mean, what we have seen is nothing short of carnage. It's quite horrible to watch.
Did the market collude to make this crash happen?
This appears to be a hedge fund. We don't know, well, people are naming the hedge fund, but I won't. And then what we don't know is in the sell-off of, the trade was instigated by one person, and then we don't know if the momentum was created by collusion. Conspiracy theories would say yes, because it's a massive trade. There was over $1 billion in capital, and then the market is saying that then they ended up going short UST, so that they took a massive risk to achieve what they did. I mean, people are saying they made $950 million.
To pull it back into the analogue world, is this comparable to when George Soros broke the Bank of England with his giant trade?
Oh, absolutely. People are comparing it to that, largely because I think that was the most money ever made in any trade that we know of, ever. And it's very similar because if you look at what George Soros did, we're talking about cryptocurrencies versus the British pound. We're talking about algorithms versus market mechanics. And there's commonalities like pegs and people trying to stabilise currencies and all sorts of market mechanics that are very similar, yes.
We talk about this as a market event, but there's a human side to it. I mean, real people have lost real money, haven't they?
The reason why UST was $18 billion was because it was backed by a savings pool, and that savings pool was offering 20% returns. So lots of innocent people had their money saved up in there, thinking they were getting risk-free deposits, which we can see now they're not risk-free, but a lot of people do talk about crypto and these returns you get in DeFi as risk-free.
Can this happen to other coins?
Look, there's a few algorithmic stablecoins that have other death spirals. I wouldn't name them, but I would encourage people to do research. Crypto is very complex.
Lisa Wade, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Taking a look at the markets, big falls today of nearly 2% following a horrible night on Wall Street. US inflation figures sent the Nasdaq in particular down 3%. And the Aussie dollar is also lower, sitting now around 68.9 US cents. Well, those US inflation figures overnight were pretty ugly. They were up 8.3% in April, with food rising at its fastest rate since 1981. The Fed is fighting back hiking interest rates, but can it bring inflation under control without causing recession? And what does it mean for us? I was joined by Justin Wolfers, economics professor at the Uni of Michigan. Justin Wolfers, have we seen a peak in US inflation?
Core inflation likely has peaked. What's difficult is Russia, Ukraine, oil, gas, and all those things that tend to bump around the headline measure a whole bit. But I think there's a lot of confidence in the US that lower numbers are ahead of us. Every day we get a step away from the pandemic, its disruptions start to decline a little bit. And then there's what's going on with inflation expectations. And so far it looks like they remain relatively unchanged.
Can the Fed bring down inflation without causing a recession? FOMC member John Williams said this week that a soft landing will be difficult but not insurmountable.
That sounds about right. Look, no one wants to cause a recession right now. Here's the weird thing about American economics right now. People are using the R word, recession, a heck of a lot. But it's kind of a funny moment to do so if you think about it. Unemployment's 3.6%. The US economy is creating 400,000 jobs a month. In normal times, we'd call that a boom. And so the reality is the economy is in a good place and it's getting better. And the single best way to figure out in the short run where the economy is going is where it's at. Where it's at and where it's going all looks pretty good. So it's hard to see a recession anytime soon. The folks who are worried about a recession are worried the Fed's going to do too much too quickly. First of all, there's no sign of that so far. Second of all, yeah, there's a risk they might do too much. There's also a risk they'll do too little.
Consumer confidence is a pretty good indicator as well of how the economy is going to perform. US consumer confidence has slipped. What do you think that portends?
It's honestly all very confusing, which is the economy is, by many measures, doing very well. Inflation being the one downside, but almost anyone who wants to find a job can find one right now. Some measures of confidence, like do workers feel confident enough to quit their jobs, suggest that they're incredibly confident. But there are other surveys that say things like, do you think the economy's growing? Are we creating jobs? The reality is we're creating a lot of jobs. Some people are answering on these surveys that we're losing jobs. And so I think you've got a very fractured, very partisan environment with a lot of very confusing signals going to a pretty confused public. And it's probably not surprising in that environment they're saying all sorts of things.
The Fed's going to start reducing its $9 trillion balance sheet next month. How significant do you think that reduction is going to be, and how quickly is it going to have an effect on cooling inflation?
What that $9 trillion is doing at the moment is it's keeping long-term interest rates down. So it's saying we're going to remove that pressure.
Inflation does present a huge problem for the Biden administration. It stressed that fighting inflation is its top economic challenge, but what can it do? And can it continue with the path that they were elected for, which is improving infrastructure, improving services, people's access to what they rightly deserve in the US economy, healthcare, education, etc. But that's all going to be pretty difficult when you've got inflation to address.
You know, the number one division is we usually rely on monetary policy to take care of inflation rather than stuff that the Biden administration controls. That said, what can the Biden administration do? And here, it can't do much to fix the inflation problem, but it could do a lot to screw it up. The economy's pretty hot right now. Adding a lot of stimulus right now, for instance, forgiving student loans, would add more coal on the fire and surely cause inflation to speed up.
I mean, this matters for an Australian audience because, of course, there's a lot of investment here waiting to take part in the Biden administration's infrastructure build, asset recycling, etc. Do you think that will be put on the back burner?
It looks like it's on the back burner for now, and more to the point, every month that the calendar ticks over brings us a month closer to the midterm elections. Midterms in the US almost always go against the president's party. So he's got enough to squeak a little bit of his agenda through right now. It seems quite unlikely, unless there's big Roe v. Wade related politics, it seems quite unlikely that he'll be in a better position after November.
Justin Wolfers, thank you.
A pleasure, Elise.
Data reveals it's now taking Australians more than a decade to save the 20% deposit for a home. Well, if first home buyers do get one together now, will rising interest rates just make it harder to get a loan? Nassim Kadem reports.
Taz Erickson has been struggling to save to buy a home. He and his partner decided to move into his parents' house in the Sunshine Coast while they get a deposit together.
It's such a huge portion of money that you need behind you, and my fiance and I don't have that as yet, so we are looking to reduce rent, and being able to live with mum and dad is a cheaper option for us.
He says even if he borrows more than 8 times his income, he's still getting priced out of the market.
Yes, I would love to book an inspection if I can for this weekend. Well, we often see a house on a street that we're driving through and we look it up or we Google it, but it ends up going for $1.5 million or more. It's just ridiculous.
New data shows it's taking first home buyers more than 11 years to save a 20% deposit for a median-priced home. Australians are now spending more than 40% of their income on mortgage repayments compared to a decade average of 36%.
I think the challenge is that for the first time in a long time, it's coming off the back of higher interest costs. So that might be a shock to some first home buyers.
Rising interest rates are a double-edged sword for first home buyers. On the one hand, economists say they're likely to make houses cheaper, but on the other, they'll reduce the amount that people can borrow and increase their monthly repayments. Housing experts say unless wages start to rise, people who borrowed at more than 6 times their income to buy a home will face financial hardship.
Unfortunately, we're in the world at the moment where real wages are actually going backwards because of inflation. And so if we don't see really big wage rises over the course of the next couple of years, it will be harder for people to service those larger mortgage repayments.
He says it could also worsen generational inequality.
Our retirement income system is contingent on the idea that people own their own home in retirement. Roughly half of renters in retirement are in financial stress and poverty today. So if we don't do something about this, we're setting a lot of people up for a really tough financial situation when they get to those retirement years.
Tas wants to see election policies aimed at helping first home buyers while reducing tax breaks for wealthy investors.
I think it's very unfair. I think if you own a couple of houses, it's easier to get your 4th and 5th and onwards, but it seems to be almost impossible to get your first.
Without changes to housing policy, home ownership might get further out of reach for yet another generation of Australians.
Nassim Kadem there. And that's all from The Business. For more on our stories, head to the ABC News website. You can catch up with the program anytime on iView. I'm Elise Morgan. Good night.
The following program contains coarse language.
Welcome to Hawaii, the home of aloha and the birthplace of surfing. It's a slice of paradise for some, but behind the postcard facade, native Hawaiians, the Kanaka Maoli, have a different story to tell.
Hawaii is being sold to the global elite. It's not a give and take, it's like a take, 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 take.
It's a struggle for land, language and culture, forcibly taken from them by the United States of America.
This is a theft. Premeditated, systematized theft.
We do not consider ourselves American. We are not going to be quiet.
We meet people determined to right these wrongs and keep Hawaii Hawaiian.
They took it away in 3 generations. We're gonna get it back in 1.
This is our home. We're here.
It is on fire. It's day number 1 of the Billabong Throw Pipeline event. 13 minutes, 25 seconds remaining.
In the place where surfing began, the most famous of all competitions is underway on the North Shore, the Pipeline Pro.
Whoa, check out this energy. It is pumping pipeline.
Day 1, pipeline's turning on.
Oh, Jack Robinson from Western Australia falls from the sky, riding through the pipe middle, grabbing rail, coming out with a spin.
Among the favourites is 11-time world champ American Kelly Slater. He turns 50 next week. You've got your big birthday coming up in a few days, man. You think this could be the birthday present?
It already is. It already has been. These waves.
For Hawaiian surfers like Seth Moniz, it's a chance to shine on home turf in a sport these islands gifted to the world.
It's a great honor, obviously. You know, I'm a native Hawaiian. I have Hawaiian blood, so that is very special to me. My whole family, friends, cousins, they've all been coming down and supporting, so it's awesome.
We're so grateful to kick off the championship tour here in Hawaii, the birthplace of surfing.
The women are tackling pipeline for the first time in competition, and the Hawaiians are leading the charge. None more so than Hawaii's queen of surfing, 5-time world champ, Carissa Moore.
She's just awesome. You can actually watch women go out there, which really inspires people like me who surf.
You? Have you ever been out of pipeline?
No, I'm not doing that yet, no.
The winter swells of the Pacific Ocean peak at this time of year. In a matter of hours, the wave size can go from playful to life-threatening. It is absolutely massive out there at Pipeline.
Oh my Lord!
They must be 20-foot faces that the surfers are tackling right now. We're seeing broken boards, but thankfully not too much damage to the surfers themselves. The Hawaiian Water Patrol behind me, they've got this show on lock. Doesn't matter how big it is, they're out there sorting it out, keeping everyone safe, so this contest can keep on going.
Most of the time, it's just like broken leashes, broken boards. Maybe like 6 or 7 broken boards today. It's pretty gnarly when it's rugged out there.
Born and bred on Oahu's North Shore, Pamai Hoapili is a member of the Hawaiian Water Patrol.
None of our crew got injured, so everybody gets to go home in their own car, not an ambulance.
Here, surfing in the ocean is about much more than a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's the root of Hawaiian culture. For hundreds of years, Hawaiians, even their kings and queens, surfed on wooden boards like these.
These are like recycled boards. These are some of the boards that I make. They're like old school style. Back in the day, they're all like one piece, like 22 feet long. What was that, 7 meters?
The most revered practitioners of this ocean culture are known as the watermen and women of the islands.
What makes a good waterman or waterwoman? To me, if I had to put like a type of word to it, I would say like gracious in the ocean and on land too. Culminating that into your life to where everything seems like surfing or like flowing, and that's like the ultimate goal.
That flow was best exemplified by Duke Kahanamoku, the father of modern surfing.
At Bondi Beach, we have a welcome visitor, Duke Kahanamoku. Last time he came to Australia, he introduced the surfboard to this country from his native Hawaii. How much pleasure the sport you introduced has brought to countless Australians.
Duke's aquatic prowess crossed from the ocean to the Olympic swimming pool, where he won 3 gold medals for the United States. Almost 100 years after his success, surfing made its debut in the Tokyo Olympics. The women's gold medal was won by Hawaii's Carissa Moore. Unlike in pro surfing, Hawaiians at the Olympics compete under the American flag. For many, a reminder of deep historical grievances.
It was huge, yeah. It was a big deal in Hawaii. People were talking about it. Like, oh, you didn't give us the flag. Everyone knows she's still Hawaiian. You know, we are our own country. There is no annexation treaty. Like, we are actually our own sovereign nation illegally occupied by the United States of America.
All Hawaii, stand together. All Hawaii, we here forever.
January 17th, 1893 was the day that we lost our status as an independent Hawaiian nation. We were invaded by the US, and it was a small group of American businessmen that overthrew our peaceful nation and imprisoned our queen in her own palace. This whole history has been hidden from our people. It was part of the Americanization, colonization of Hawaii. A lot of us grew up not even knowing about the overthrow.
These annual marches to Iolani Palace began in 1993, on the 100th anniversary of the Queen's overthrow. They were led by the iconic activist, the late Haunani K. Trusk.
The Americans, my people, are our enemies, and you must understand that. They are our enemies. They took our land. They imprisoned our queen. They banned our language. We are not American. We are not American. We are not American. We are not American. Say it in your heart. Say it when you sleep. We are not American. We will die as Hawaiians. We will never be Americans.
I would like to believe that when she spoke those strong words that shook me inside, that we are not American, that she meant that we are a people who don't abandon the natural laws of our island. In our resistance.
Kalehua Krug is a community leader and a school principal.
Resistance is not only how we get our land back. Definitely the seeds that we plant through resistance are going to get us control, political control back of our lands. But it's also medicine. That resistance is how we heal.
Queen Liliuokalani was overthrown by the plantation oligarchs, known as the Big Five. They transformed the islands into farms to mass-produce sugar and fruit.
As the demand for pineapple grew, so did the need for more land. So, in 1922, James Dole bought the island of Lanai and converted it from a cactus-covered island into the largest pineapple plantation in the world.
Over the decades, Hawaii was also becoming increasingly important as a strategic base, and in 1959 became the 50th state of the USA. This triggered a boom in tourism, today Hawaii's largest source of income. Waikiki Beach is the jewel in the crown of the tourism industry. Every year, millions of visitors descend on this piece of sand for their taste of paradise. But at the edge of this playground is a different reality. This flip side is what Indigenous filmmaker Chris Kahunahana wants the world to see.
Waikiki is a story about contemporary Hawaii. Initially, for the film industry, Hawaii was seen as Hollywood's backdrop. So, it served as a beautiful location for a Caucasian-centered hero. They shoot here, but the stories weren't created here. They weren't about here. They were just using here as an exotic location that's prettier than Detroit, for instance, right? The world's starting to understand the value of authentic stories, right? People are getting tired of seeing the same old shit.
Yes, sir!
Yes, sir!
Yay! It's all filmed before. What is this?
ABC Australia.
YouTube?
ABC Australia, television.
I can't even hear you right now.
YouTube.
YouTube?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Continue that.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Hawaii, have a beach. Have a beach.
Burning everything to the ground.
The price of land has been rising steadily over the past decade. It shot up even higher during COVID as mainlanders bought island getaways.
Hawaii is being sold to the global elite. Hawaiians and the local population is competing against unlimited funds from everywhere. It's always ranked 1, 2, or 3 as the most expensive places to live in the United States. So it's either New York, San Francisco, or Hawaii, and it fluctuates. But man, at least in San Francisco, and I mean, you know, you got the tech industry, and in New York, it's media. It's fucking New York. How are they supposed to compete against that? Like, what kind of jobs are they supposed to have? Unfortunately, the only jobs that they provide for people in Hawaii is tourism jobs, which are like servant jobs, right? It's like you're servicing a population, providing them with entertainment and an experience. It makes you like a servant to the system. It's like you can't live outside of the system without land.
We talk about Hawaiians not being able to afford here. What happens if Hawaiians can't live here? I mean...
Yeah, well, without Hawaiians, is it really Hawaii? It's not. And then the powers that be, they don't give a shit.
The housing affordability crisis is driving a homeless epidemic. The state has one of the highest per capita rates of homelessness in the US. Native Hawaiians have been hardest hit. It's hard to go anywhere on the island of Oahu and not encounter the problem. So I notice here in Hawaii, no one says homeless, they say houseless.
They're displaced. It's not like they don't belong here. It's like when you say they're homeless, it's like they don't have a home. No, they actually have a home. You know, the fact that they can't afford to purchase a house, I mean, it's still their home.
A short drive from Waikiki is the Waianae Boat Harbour. Here, a community of houseless Hawaiians are tackling the crisis together. Twinkle Borge is the camp's matriarch.
So at night when you come in, we do have securities. We do have securities that sit here. This is Herman. He's one of my heads. That's my head of my securities. Besides one of my overseas.
Herman, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
You looking after the place at night?
Yeah.
This is Puahanua o Waianae. Puahanua means place of refuge.
I've been here since all the way back to 2004. At that time, it was only 7 of us. And as people started coming with family, I would just give away my camp. Yeah, because my thing was I didn't want to see the kids stressing. I didn't want to see them sleeping on the ground.
Twinkle transformed that makeshift camp into something more permanent. Today, around 250 people live here.
Yeah, so this is my bedroom.
That
actually works.
That actually works?
Yeah, that actually works. I mean, this is our home, you know? We don't have the privilege of going in and turning on our lights or flicking on that pipe to turn on our water. Here we have generators. We bring in our own water.
Gotta get the water every day, yeah? Yeah, yeah.
Honestly, I don't like the bugs. I hate bugs.
How long have you guys been living here?
10 years.
10 years?
Yeah.
Feel safe here?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. 22-year-old John Isaac moved here 4 years ago.
My parents actually moved in before I did. I was living on my own already. But the household I was living with was getting evicted, so I never be a burden to them.
Welcome to Hawaii. Aloha.
Aloha.
My son, I got 4, and he's one of them that stays in the front with the front line. Mama Twinkle's them.
Twinkle's team?
Yes. We all are. Every single one of us in here. She's just one of those that is willing to be the spear, the head of that spear.
Isaac. I always ask myself, what can I do? How can we get them help? What can be built for them? I'm not saying that we 100% solution. We're part of that solution.
Kanakamali Hawaiians are looking to themselves for solutions. The classroom is ground zero. Kalehua Krug is the principal at Kawaiona Akana Avao, a charter school that focuses on reviving Hawaiian culture.
When you give history to them at a young age, when you give the culture and ceremony and language to them at a young age, they don't have to feel the loss like we did. You know, they don't have to take that punch in the gut that we had to take as a generation of natives in this time period. For them, it's hopefully lessening the load or the intergenerational trauma that they have to bear. We still believe in the sciences. We still believe in physics and engineering. We still believe in mathematics, as long as the ethics that come from the wisdom of our ancestry are attached to them.
In the valley behind the school is one of several US military bases. The students regularly hear the sound of bombing from over the range.
We tell them, you hear that? Do you feel that in your stomach? Because I felt it in my stomach. It was like an earthquake. We can't keep letting it happen without feeling the pain that the earth is feeling, that the land is feeling, the creatures there are feeling. We have military families send their children here, so we're not necessarily preaching demilitarization, but we're teaching you to see that as wrong.
Aloha.
Desecration of land is wrong.
Since the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom, the US Armed Forces have always had a presence in Hawaii. Pearl Harbor may well be the most famous military base here in Hawaii, but their reach extends much further. Across the island of Oahu, the military occupy more than 20% of the land. That's in a place where land is pretty hard to come by. Adding insult to injury, the US Navy recently admitted to leaking jet fuel into Oahu's freshwater supply, putting at risk around 400,000 people who rely on this water.
The travesty that we're facing right now with jet fuel in our aquifer, that is an example that the US Navy does not embrace our values. They don't understand water flow. They don't understand how to care for natural resources. They don't care about anyone downstream.
The water crisis has emboldened calls for the state of Hawaii to cancel the military's leases, due for renewal in 2029. It has also amplified the debate about stolen land.
If we still had our land base, we would not be like this. This is a theft, you know, premeditated, systematized theft. And they took it from our elite, they took it from our chiefs, they took it from the royalty, they took it from all of our families, historically, so that they had the land base, because land, you know, builds generational wealth, and they could control the resources, they could lock up the water, they could lock up the food, they could lock up the ability for Hawaii to self-sustain.
In a valley not far from the school, some of that land is being taken back. Here we are. After living almost 20 years in the Boat Harbour camp, Twinkle and her team are building a permanent home for their community.
For the last 5 years, I kept telling people, even the people on top of my team, and they would laugh when I said, this is gonna be our home. 5 years I passed this gate and said, this is gonna be our home. well, this is our home. We're here.
Through a mix of donations and grants, Twinkle was able to purchase his 20-acre parcel of land, Pu'uhonua Ma'oka.
The plan is building out our homes, bringing the people home, try to work towards being self-sustaining.
In terms of growing food and power.
Yes.
Yeah.
And guess what? They're all gonna get running water. Amazing. Never thought I would be doing the things that I am doing today. Today I'm able to help my family, you know, to be a little bit more productive. Amazing.
I don't know.
For Twinkle, the main focus is giving the next generation a better start.
I mean, for my kids, I'm so adamant with them schooling. If you act up with the teachers or anything, they gotta call me up. I'll let my kids know I'm gonna show up to your school with my spots, bro. And trust and believe me, I do that. My paydays is when my kids bring me home the diplomas. That's paydays. Might be a sacrifice for me, but at the end, it'll be a reward. Yeah, to see the accomplishment, to see the cycle they're breaking for their family, you know, just to get ahead. Yeah. That's paydays.
Across the islands, there is a growing movement to keep Hawaii Hawaiian. Back on the North Shore, Pamai knows that the tide is turning.
It's kind of like a modern Hawaiian Renaissance. Everyone's becoming more educated about it and how to deal with it. My daughter's in 5th grade, and in Olelo, Hawaii, I'm in 3rd grade. And so it's funny to come home and have conversations about school, and I'm trying to like speak Hawaiian to her as much as I can.
You speak better than your dad?
He's learning, so kind of.
It's finals day at the Pipeline Pro, and the Water Patrol is back to work. Pamai takes me for a spin on the jet ski to check out the conditions up close. How's it looking, bro?
Looks pretty fucking sick.
It's on. The pride of the Hawaiian crowd, Seth Moniz is surfing against the greatest of all time, Kelly Slater. Seth's support crew is firing up.
Blasting to 308. You have priority. 6 minutes, 50 seconds.
30 years after he first won here at Pipeline, Slater does it again. Claiming this historic victory, Slater pays his respect to the islands of Hawaii.
Everyone who comes to Hawaii should take care of this place and really respect the culture and the locals and realize it's their home and it's your place to visit, but you know, take care of it and look after it.
It's really special, and I'm happy I could, you know, make them proud and make it to the finals. You know, we're almost there, one spot off, but look, I'm gonna be here for a long time, so I'm excited for the future.
The women's final is an all-Hawaiian affair. The favourite, Carissa Moore, and local wildcard, Moana Jones-Wong.
I'm just so super happy that the Hawaiians are dominating their sport again. I'm getting goosebumps. I feel super good because all the little girls, so many little girls are out here watching them, and I mean, I'm proud of them. Look at these waves, they're huge. Great to see the Kanaka Maoli women out there wearing their flag. Finally, you know, so proud of them.
Today, it's not Carissa's day. Moana is crowned the first queen of Pipeline.
I used to be that kid on the beach screaming Carissa's name. And I grew up just watching the Pipe Masters all the time, like thinking I would never even go out there. So to come out here and like win a contest, like an actual ginormous contest like this is insane. Everybody came down to watch me, screaming for me, just like so much support, and I couldn't have done it without them.
That was a big result, you know. There's like 3 out of 4 people in finals from Hawaii. That's huge. It was really cool to see that go down in history.
As the world tour moves on, in the birthplace of surfing, the message is clear.
Hawaiians just want to be Hawaiian in Hawaii. Be Hawaiian, speak Hawaiian, live Hawaiian. The longer you stay alive, the longer people remember, like, we're here. But if we stop, down the line, people stop talking about us. We disappear. So we gotta keep practicing.
Right here in the island, people wear chains called poverty and violence. They want us to refrain from acting out, remain silent. So I stepped in the game to keep Hawaii, Hawaii. I was born and raised. Yeah, right here in the island, people wear chains called poverty and violence. They want us to refrain from acting out, remain silent. So I stepped in the game to keep Hawaii, Hawaii. I was born and raised. Right here in the island, people wear chains called poverty and violence. They want us to refrain from acting out, remain silent. So I stepped in the game. Keep Hawaii, Hawaii. I was born and raised. You're right here in the island. People wear chains called poverty and violence.
Economic growth family had never lost live performance.
Anthony Albanese walks back expectations of mass pay rises as the minimum wage debate continues to dominate the election campaign. Airport arrest, a yacht captain accused of being linked to a dead cocaine diver. Russian wreckage as the troops retreat. Ghost towns near Chernobyl reveal new scars. And Australia's Ange Postecoglou completes a stunning title-winning season at Scottish giant Celtic. Hello and welcome to ABC Late News. I'm Michael Tetlow. Anthony Albanese has clarified his stance on the minimum wage, narrowing the number of workers he believes should get a pay rise in line with inflation. The Labor leader says he was referring to the near 200,000 lowest paid workers, not to 2.5 million others whose pay is pegged to the minimum wage. Here's political editor Andrew Probyn.
This close to election day, leaders go where the fight's tight. Anthony Albanese on the hunt in the Queensland seat of Flynn.
Just watch your head.
Scott Morrison in Bass, Tasmania, seeking to shore up support in his most marginal seat.
The whole environment that you're trying to operate in.
With a mental health commitment close to his colleague's heart.
I have anxiety and panic disorders and having a bit of a panic attack when I walked in here this morning, so I'm in the right place.
Bridget Archer deftly handling awkward questions about a Liberal hopeful's transphobic campaign.
LGBTIQ community members are some 15 times more likely to suffer mental health challenges. I think we all should be very mindful of that.
But it's the stoush over wages that lives on, including in the final leaders' debate.
The idea that 2 cups of coffee a day is something that would damage the economy is, I believe, just not the case.
A 5%, 0.1% increase, he may be trying to walk it back now, that would push up inflation.
A shiny prop even carried over from the night before.
$1.
Whether those people on the minimum wage in Australia get $1.
Don't let him near the till, because he doesn't know how much things cost.
Mr Albanese has backed a 5.1% increase to the minimum wage, which is paid to 184,000 workers. The wages of 2.5 million others are pegged to the minimum wage. The Labor leader today clarifying it's not them he has in mind.
What I am talking about here is people who are on $20.33 an hour that the federal government says they should have their real wage cut.
He has had 3 positions on the one thing on one day. He knows he got that wrong.
The longer this campaign goes, the harder it is to see a path to victory for Scott Morrison. National polling confirms the PM is facing a double threat, not only from an increasingly confident Labor Party, but Teal independents who could be on the verge of snatching a seat or two from inner-city Liberals. The Prime Minister reminded of another trouble at a Tasmanian cheese shop.
We have lost the plot in the South Pacific.
A former High Commissioner to the Solomon Islands prevented from giving the PM a gobful over his handling of the Pacific relationship. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
Labor has accused Scott Morrison of actively encouraging the controversial Darwin port deal. It says documents show when the Prime Minister was Treasurer, he approved a multi-million-dollar incentive payment to the Northern Territory government to privatise the port.
The decision to lease the Darwin port to a Chinese-owned company in 2015 continues to be the focus of rancorous political debate.
You allowed it to happen? No, we didn't. The federal government had absolutely no authority over that sale whatsoever.
Landbridge paid $506 million to the former NT-CLP government in return for a 99-year lease over the strategic maritime asset. At the time, the deal was given the all-clear by national security agencies. But Labor says Scott Morrison, who was Treasurer at the time, should have done more to block the lease. Instead, the opposition claims he actively encouraged it.
Scott Morrison signs off an agreement, signs this agreement, in fact, and there's his signature there, in 2016, effectively providing a sweetener, encouragement, an incentive.
The incentive payment was part of a federal program designed to encourage state and territory governments to privatise assets and reinvest the funds in new infrastructure. The opposition says these Commonwealth documents show $19.5 million was promised to the NT government for the privatisation of the Port of Darwin, in an arrangement signed off by Scott Morrison 6 months after the facility was leased.
He still fails to take responsibility for the fact that he put money on the table to sweeten the deal for the NT government.
The ABC has sought comment from the coalition but is yet to receive a response. Last year, amid rising tensions with China, the federal government initiated a new national security review of the port deal. While the review hasn't been made public, the Prime Minister has previously said he's received no advice to revoke the lease. Jono Gibson, ABC News.
A veteran yachting captain has been charged over a drug haul in Newcastle that resulted in the death of a professional diver. The man in custody was caught trying to leave the country from Cairns, as Mark Reddy explains.
Day 10 in the backyard, practising for Australian Survivor.
After a failed attempt at a television career,
we're off to Tribal Council tonight.
James Blee embarked on a new adventure, chartering super yachts in the Asia Pacific as Captain Jimmy Blee.
I'm on the road at the moment, promoting Asia Pacific Super Yachts Indonesia.
Now the 62-year-old is an accused drug smuggler. After his arrest in Cairns while trying to board a flight to Singapore, police divers returned to the port of Newcastle. Detectives say Mr. Blee brought in at least $20 million worth of cocaine on a ship carrying soy powder from Argentina. The drugs were found near the body of a diver suspected of trying to collect the bricks of cocaine late Sunday night. Investigators believe another $20 million worth made it onto the streets. Labor is blaming cuts to local Border Patrol officers, something the government rejects.
The Newcastle office is very well resourced. It's entirely capable of going out and protecting our borders. So this is an absolutely outrageous lie.
Detectives from the Organised Crime Squad boarded a plane from Sydney to Cairns this afternoon and will apply for Mr. Blee's extradition to New South Wales tomorrow. The father of two faces up to 20 years in jail if found guilty of commercial drug supply and importation offences. Investigators are also looking at whether the Newcastle job is linked to Indonesia's biggest seizure of cocaine. Sailors found the drugs dumped in the ocean.
Sebesar
It turned out that the item found was cocaine, weighing 179 kilograms.
Back in Australia, with one man behind bars, police are still searching for a second diver, with more arrests likely. Mark Reddy, ABC News, Sydney.
Police investigating the shooting of a bikie boss and his brother in Sydney's west have found a charred handgun and bullets in a burnt-out car. The vehicle's one of two cars torched in the hours after the fatal shooting, which killed Omar Zahed. The gun will be forensically examined by police. Comanchero boss Tarek Zahed remains in hospital.
He's still alive and he's obviously been shot in the head and sustained horrific injuries. And so his long-term prognosis is unknown, but he survived his surgery and he's in a stable condition in hospital.
Extra officers have been committed to the anti-bikie squad, Strike Force Raptor. Efforts are underway to clear landmines laid by Russian troops as they retreated from Chernobyl, the exclusion zone in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin's army destroyed infrastructure and stole property during the occupation of the defunct power plant. Europe correspondent Nick Dole reports from Chernobyl.
The drive into Chernobyl was eerie before the war, but now there's a whole new layer of horrors. The gates, once visited by curious tourists, look to be the scene of a firefight. As we drive towards the number 4 reactor, the site of one of the world's worst nuclear incidents, there are more signs of the Russian forces that took up position here. They'd invaded from nearby Belarus and found themselves on a site that they were hopelessly unprepared for.
Over here is where some Russian soldiers have dug their trenches. This is highly contaminated land and it shouldn't have been disturbed. It's certainly not safe to go walking in there, but this is where some Russian soldiers have spent days, if not weeks.
These occupying soldiers could have received a high dose of radiation on their bodies, which will give them health problems for the rest of their lives. So their lifespan will depend on how long they have spent in these trenches.
The International Atomic Energy Agency says there's more than 4 times the radiation in the disturbed trenches as there is on nearby ground, but it's still within the safe range. Ukrainian officials say some of the Russians who occupied the facility handled highly radioactive substances during their month-long occupation. But the town of Pripyat, abandoned in the wake of the 1986 disaster, went mostly undisturbed. The famous fairground still sits idle, surrounded by decaying hotels reserved for the guests that will never come.
Pripyat would have to be one of the most unlivable places on Earth, so it's perhaps no surprise that Russian soldiers didn't waste much time here. The buildings here are empty shells and there are none of the comforts soldiers might have been looking for. They did take out the mobile phone towers and then they essentially moved on.
They were more interested in Chernobyl itself, a town where it's safe enough to live, but only for a couple of weeks at a time. The workers here do shifts while they service the nuclear site. Engineer Alexander Skirta was on duty when the Russians arrived. He says they looted constantly, and what they couldn't take, they seemed determined to break.
We were very worried about what could happen. This is Chernobyl, a nuclear power plant. It's dangerous.
Even in Russia's retreat, the destruction continued. The bridges were blown on the way back to Belarus to stop the Ukrainians giving chase. Whatever radiation they were exposed to could take years to catch up with them. Nick Dole, ABC News, Chernobyl.
A blame game has erupted over the shooting death of an American-Palestinian journalist in the West Bank. Al Jazeera reporter Shireen Abu Akleh was killed, her colleagues and Palestinians say, by Israeli forces. ABC correspondent Alison Horn reports from Jerusalem, and a warning, you may find her story distressing.
A man calls out desperately for an ambulance, but only gunshots respond. Amongst the barrage, Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh is shot and killed. Another journalist crouches down to help her, but is forced back by gunfire. Abu Akleh's colleague was also shot, but is now in a stable condition.
The occupation is murderous and criminal. They shoot us for no reason.
She wasn't just my aunt, she's also my best friend, my second mom.
Inside her home, relatives gather in stunned silence. But outside, people were demanding answers. An Israeli policeman is mobbed by mourners as he tries to enter the home. The media organisation she works for, Al Jazeera, says Israeli troops fired the fatal shots. Israel says it's now investigating, but Palestine says it must be done independently.
They are the criminals and the criminals cannot investigate themselves.
Israel's Prime Minister says this video is proof that Palestinian gunmen could have fired the shots as his forces were conducting a raid in the area.
The Palestinian Authority was quick to blame Israel before any investigation.
But an Israeli human rights group says it's very unlikely the fatal shots were fired from here, saying Abu Akla was too far away.
Since April, the Israeli military has been performing regular raids in Jenin in the wake of several attacks. And in a region long rocked by tension, Abu Akla's death is seen by some as not only an attack on press freedom, but also on Palestinians.
Shireen Abu Akla, once the voice for the people, now it's the people speaking out for her. Alison Horn, ABC News, Jerusalem.
Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese have a little over a week to convince voters that they should govern the country. ABC Vote Compass has asked you to rate the leaders out of 10 on competency and trustworthiness. Bridget Brennan has more.
At the pointy end of the campaign, the volume is getting higher.
We have put forward. It is right, actually.
And the personal attacks are becoming sharper.
You haven't got a plan.
Despite the noise, when Australians go to the ballot box next weekend, they'll be assessing the level of trust they place in each leader.
So how competent do voters find Anthony Albanese and Scott Morrison? Marked out of 10, it wasn't quite a high distinction for either leader. Vote Compass shows Australians scored Scott Morrison a 3 and Anthony Albanese a 5. And on the question of trustworthiness, Australians marked Mr Morrison a 2.8 and Mr Albanese a 5.2.
This is consistent with the types of surveys that we see over time in Australian studies. Australians are tough judges on their political leaders.
The Prime Minister's ratings have fallen since 2019. It's not surprising. It's another 3 years in office. It's been a difficult 3 years. He's clearly lost some bark with the electorate.
Overall, on trust and competency, Vote Compass shows the Prime Minister scored a 3 and the Labor leader a 5. Since 2019, Australians' view on Scott Morrison's trustworthiness and competency has fallen. At the last election, Bill Shorten had a similar rating.
The results are very similar to the preferred Prime Minister polls we see published, and they show that Scott Morrison is not as popular or respected as he was at the last election, and Anthony Albanese is rating much higher than Bill Shorten did in 2019.
And compared to men, Australian women marked Scott Morrison down on the question of trust and competency.
So I think the most telling thing that's come out of this data from Vote Compass is the gender differences in the responses. Women, irrespective of partisanship, overall are really marking Scott Morrison down.
This election, the Greens are hopeful of swings in key urban seats.
The Greens are on the march.
Vote Compass shows leader Adam Bandt scored a 4 overall on the question of trust and competency.
To tell us what you think and find out how your views align with those of Australia's political parties, visit Vote Compass online and fill out the survey yourself.
Bridget Brennan there. First home buyers hoping to take advantage of falling house prices might find it's even harder to break into the market. Rising interest rates will mean loans will be harder to get and more expensive to pay off. New figures also show it's taking more than a decade for the average Australian to save enough for their deposit.
Yes, I'm calling about the property.
Taz Erickson and his partner decided to move into his parents' house while they save for a deposit.
Yes, I would love to book an inspection if I can for this weekend. It's such a huge portion of money that you need behind you, and my fiancé and I don't have that as yet.
New data shows it's taking first home buyers more than 11 years to save a 20% deposit for a median-priced home. Australians are now spending more than 40% of their income on mortgage repayments compared to a decade average of 36%.
I think the challenge is that for the first time in a long time, it's coming off the back of higher interest costs. So that might be a shock to some first home buyers.
Rising interest rates are a double-edged sword for first home buyers. On the one hand, economists say they're likely to make houses cheaper, but on the other, they'll reduce the amount that people can borrow and increase their monthly repayments.
Housing experts say unless wages start to rise, people who borrowed at more than 6 times their income to buy a home will face financial hardship.
If we don't see really big wage rises over the course of the next couple of years, it will be harder for people to service those larger mortgage repayments.
Tas wants to see election policies aimed at helping first home buyers while reducing tax breaks for wealthy investors.
I think it's very unfair. I think if you own a couple of houses, it's easier to get your 4th and 5th and onwards, but it seems to be almost impossible to get your first.
Without changes to housing policy, home ownership might get further out of reach for yet another generation of Australians. Nasim Khadem, ABC News.
Generations of Queenslanders conceived with donated sperm, eggs and embryos don't know who their biological parents are. Tomorrow, a parliamentary committee will examine whether they should be given a legal right to know.
It took 22 years for Kerry Favarato to solve the mystery of her blue eyes.
As I looked at his face, I just saw these sparkling blue eyes looking back at me, and they were my eyes.
I looked at him and went, oh yeah, she's one of my lot.
Now the Brackenridge mum is catching up on lost time with a man who shares 50% of her DNA.
He calls me his daughter or donor daughter or sort of daughter.
As a medical student in the 1980s, Donald Whittaker, or Digger, donated sperm to a fertility clinic.
Oh, weekly basis, sometimes twice a week.
When Kerry tried to get information from the fertility clinic, she met excuse after excuse.
No, there was a flood and all of your records were destroyed. Oh no, there was a fire. They were all fire damaged. They were all destroyed.
Eventually, the clinic provided a redacted record, but no clues. So she did a DNA test, matching with a distant relative of her mystery donor.
We deserve to know the truth about where we've come from.
Queensland has no laws governing the access of donor information. Fertility clinics operate under National Health and Medical Research Council guidelines, which have required donors to be identifiable since 2004.
Those guidelines aren't enforceable if you don't have law.
It still leaves many at the mercy of private fertility clinics.
We desperately need an independent body to govern record keeping.
The state government has now launched an inquiry into whether donor-conceived people should have the legal right to know their donor's identity. It's considering establishing a register, like in Victoria and New South Wales.
It really is a human rights issue.
It's also a health issue, with many donor-conceived people missing half of their genetic medical history. The parliamentary committee will try to balance their right to information with donors' rights to privacy.
Most donors are actually very willing to share their information, and indeed many weren't given the choice at the time.
As well as Digger, Kerry's found 7 half-siblings so far. Alexander Lewis, ABC News.
Graziers in the Victorian Alps rarely see eye to eye with environmentalists, but they've joined forces in a bid to stop the logging of native timber. The timber industry says these areas, which remained unburned through the Black Summer bushfires, are vital to the future of Victoria's logging communities.
In Victoria's high country, an unlikely alliance has formed.
Environmental groups working with mountain cattle people is probably not what you expect.
These people, they're passionate. They're passionate about saving our earth.
Krista Treasure is a 5th-generation high country cattle grazier. Today, she's welcomed environmentalists onto the Hotham Heights property her family's farmed for 140 years to help fight against native timber harvesting in the Little Dargo River catchment.
It's just gorgeous, and we don't want this lost. It's so steep in there. Any roads are going to make a terrible mess of it.
The catchment sits just south of the ski resorts at Hotham and Dinner Plain. 11 unburnt coops have been earmarked for logging by Vic Forests, with 1 already harvested.
It's really important we protect these little pockets of unburnt treasures that still do exist in the high country.
Native timber harvesting is an issue that has united environmentalists and farmers here in the high country. But industry groups say the sector is still vital to many Victorian communities.
How are we going to supply these companies that employ so many people?
The state government's committed to phasing out native timber logging by 2030 and wants the towns that rely on it to diversify.
The $100 million that was announced in December includes funding to support those communities with their aspirations for the future of their townships.
The government says it's yet to make a final decision on the remaining Little Dargo River coops. Erin Somerville, ABC News, Hotham Heights.
Australia has been awarded hosting rights for the 2027 Men's and 2029 Women's Rugby World Cups. It'll be the third time Australia's hosted the men's event after co-hosting the first tournament with New Zealand back in 1987. It then won sole rights for 2003. The 2027 tournament is expected to generate nearly $3 billion for the national economy. But it's still unclear where the final will be held, with Sydney, Melbourne and Perth all boasting venues that can seat more than the required 60,000 fans. Ange Postecoglou has led Celtic to the Scottish Football Premiership in just his first year in charge of the famous club. The former Socceroos coach can now lay claim to being one of Australian sport's greatest success stories after winning titles in 3 countries. Here's national sport reporter David Mark.
It's a remarkable achievement for Ange Postecoglou.
Scottish football fans now know what Australians have known for many years. Ange Postecoglou is a coach who quite simply wins.
That Celtic are champions of Scotland.
All it took was a 1-1 draw against Dundee United to confirm the premiership for Celtic.
You know, I think we're worthy champions. We've overcome every obstacle thrown at us, including a difficult start, and you know, I think rightly deserved to end up on top.
He understands Celtic. He's come into this club and been a breath of fresh air.
He's won over the fans, but the critics were scathing when Postecoglou took over as manager of one of Europe's most successful clubs.
Was it Postecoglou? Oh, he'd be a great manager. Huh? Where did they come up with these guys from?
Those critics hadn't done their research.
He's very motivating. I think he speaks really well. He hits the right notes when it comes to inspiring teams to perform.
Back-to-back championships with Brisbane Roar put Postecoglou on the map.
The Socceroos, champions of Asia.
It took the Socceroos to their greatest heights, winning the Asian Cup. Then gave it all up for another challenge, taking Japan's Yokohama F. Marinos to the J-League title. And now he's done the same for Celtic.
It's a massive event. I mean, they're very passionate about their football in Scotland.
Coaching, let alone winning, in Europe is uncharted waters in football's homeland. But Ange Postecoglou is no ordinary coach. David Mark, ABC News.
Now to the weather, here's Paul Higgins.
Well, a stubborn trough in the east is going to keep that rain going over the eastern inland, and the rain band you can see in the west will move further east, but it will weaken. Now, we've got this low off the Queensland coast that is heading southwards, and in combination with an upper level low over southeast Queensland, wind and rain will intensify in that area from early tomorrow. So there is a warning of heavy rainfall developing over the Sunshine Coast and Wide Bay and Burnett District, and also a hazardous surf warning for the Fraser Island coast, Sunshine Coast waters, and right down to the Gold Coast. Showers and storms about the North Tropical and central areas of the state as well. 40 to 70 millimetres of rain for Brisbane. Sydney's in for 15 to 25 millimetres, and in Canberra some morning showers as rain continues in the east, but it will tend back to just a few showers during the day. A shower or two for central and eastern Victoria, mostly over the north though. In Melbourne, the chance of a shower. Dry across Tasmania, including Hobart, until some showers in the evening in the northwest. Morning fog over eastern parts of South Australia, then dry across the state until some afternoon showers west of Ceduna, partly cloudy in Adelaide. In the west, showers southwest of line Pardue to Giles. There's a warning of damaging winds tomorrow morning along that south coast, and in Perth some morning showers. Thunderstorms over the Pilbara and northern Gascoyne, possibly heavy rain as well, and a chance of showers about the western top end and Tiwi Islands, partly cloudy in Darwin.
Thank you, Paul. And that's ABC Late News to the moment. I'm Michael Tetlow from the team. Thanks very much for watching. Take care and bye for now.
He's more dangerous than he's ever been in the last 22 years.
Red alert.
Putin the Great is what he wants to be.
Vladimir Putin's road to war.
To lie is what he was taught.
This was not the war of the Russian people. This is Vladimir Putin's war.
The question everyone is asking is, what do we do about Vladimir Putin?
He will not be humiliated, and that makes him also much more dangerous.
Four Corners, Monday, ABC TV and ABC iView.
May 21, Australia decides.
Together we can build a better future.
Strong economy means a stronger future.
Who will be our next PM?
Because we're backing you.
Australians deserve better.
Join Australia's best political minds as we bring you live results seat by seat.
Lost 1 or 2 seats to independents.
Can the coalition go a 4th term, or will Labor rise to power? Australia votes. Saturday, May 21 on ABC, or live stream on ABC iView.
Welcome to the program. Cost of living is a hot election issue, and so the Reserve Bank's decision to raise interest rates during the campaign for the first time since 2007 was a big deal. Rhiannon Shine and Alison Shao have been assessing the impact in 2 classic mortgage belt seats on opposite sides of the country.
Chasing their dream of beachside home ownership, Christine and Natalie Foster-Warren headed 40 minutes north of Perth.
We've always wanted to live by the beach, and this was, I suppose, the affordable option. It's close enough to the beach that you can walk there. It's a lovely area.
Alkimos is in the marginal seat of Pearce, which takes in outer suburbs north of Perth. With sprawling suburban development attracting a lot of first home buyers, experts say it's one of the electorates where the RBA's recent rate hike will hit the hardest.
More than 72% of households in Pearce are registering as in mortgage stress, and we measure stress in terms of cash flow, so money in, money out, which essentially means that a lot of households there are really beginning to struggle already before the rate rises flow through.
So it's not surprising that the cost of living is front of mind for many voters here.
Everything's gone up. It's fuel, food, can't even breathe without it costing.
I'm a working mum, so everything escalates. I don't think that wages sort of increase in line with actually what you pay.
Mortgages going up, petrol going up. Working full time and being a single parent, it affects you a lot as well, having just that one income.
The recent interest rate rise will see the average monthly mortgage repayments in Pearce increase by around $30. But a 2% rise would add $280 to monthly repayments.
This is a food one, so that's all right.
For the Foster-Warrens, the rate rise will add a manageable $50 per month to their mortgage repayments, but they're bracing for more to come. Up to 2.5%, what would that do to the household budget?
We'd have to really reassess it. It would really mean rebudgeting to say, okay, how much have we got left after all of these come out?
We're just going to be thinking twice every time we're thinking about buying something. It's like, well, can we afford it now with the extra money going on the mortgage?
The rate hike means mortgagees like the Foster-Warrens are re-examining household budgets and preparing to tighten their belts as they head to the polls. And on the other side of the country, it's also weighing on the mind of John Mokdassi, who lives in the outer Sydney suburb of Jordan Springs.
You work so hard to get where you are, and you think that you can actually, make a living on the budget that you've set prior to the interest rate hike. And it just feels like it's a bit daunting, to be honest.
Jordan Springs is in the seat of Lindsay, a marginal electorate on the western edge of Sydney, which has changed hands at the last 3 elections.
Do you want banana bread?
John Mokdassi is one of the electorate's many swinging voters and says the recent interest rate rise has him leaning towards a change of government, but he's cynical about what the major parties are offering.
I feel like the government has kind of left us in the dark, and there's pretty no support for first home buyers. I feel like it's like tough luck, good luck repaying it if you can't sell your home.
Experts say there are a number of marginal electorates in outer metropolitan areas where rental and mortgage stress rates are high.
The way that this is unfolding at the time of the election is significant. The prospect of belt tightening isn't a very attractive one, isn't very appealing. It's quite hard for an incumbent government to portray the message that everything is great, we've been running things really well up until now, and the prospects are equally good.
Been a lot of spending during the pandemic, which is understandable. It had to be done, but it's affecting us now. So it's a catch-22.
I feel like both parties overspent, so I feel like they're not really helpful in terms of people like us. Obviously, we need to work more, do more overtime.
I sympathise with Australians as they face higher cost of living pressures. I sympathise with Australians when they face higher repayments on their homes. Of course I do. And that's why we've provided the relief in the budget that is the function of our strong economic plan.
Financial analyst Martin North is warning of tougher times ahead, especially for vulnerable first home buyers who haven't had the time to build up a buffer.
I think we're going to see interest rates rising, we're going to see house prices falling, we're going to see cost of living pressures, and I'm doubting whether we're going to see much in the way of income rise as well.
We do want to grow our family, but in terms of financial stress, I don't think it's possible at the moment. Having 2 children is already enough stress financially. Adding another one would cease my wife from working and me working more, and yeah, it's too difficult.
I'll go to 3, 4, 5 different shops. I like to be saving the money. It's just getting harder, especially with fresh fruit and veg. It's just getting harder and harder day by day, week by week.
What does an Australian federal election look like to a veteran foreign correspondent? After decades of world-class reporting from the UK, Asia, North America and Australia, former BBC correspondent Nick Bryant takes a look behind the scenes at both the Morrison and Albanese campaigns.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Back in Parramatta. Good to see you. Okay, let's go.
The federal election 2022, where the high-visibility fluorescent jacket has become a daily symbol of what's widely seen as a dismal campaign.
Here we go.
The determination of both leaders to appeal to the Australian everyman even extends to dressing like him as well.
A mate of mine was Trevor Davis.
From the outside, it looks less like a travelling circus and more like a transcontinental costume party. But what does it feel like, close up on the trail? Meet at the Four Seasons, they said. Words which, for a veteran of the Trump years, evoke memories not of a luxury hotel, but a landscape gardening business in Pennsylvania.
Hi, Angie. It's Eliza. How are you?
Then it was on to the Scott Morrison press bus, what some reporters have dubbed the Pork Barrel Express, for the journey out to the western suburbs of Sydney, the first electoral battleground of the day.
We're almost there. I think it's actually in a park near the mosque.
You don't need a sat-nav to find your way around an Australian election, just a working knowledge of the marginal seats. But the first stop of the day was actually a community event rather than a political photo opportunity. A celebration of the Muslim festival Eid on a sports oval in Parramatta. So no need for a high-vis jacket here. Instead, Scott Morrison could benefit from an advantage of incumbency, the chance to appear prime ministerial and to enjoy a moment that briefly transcended politics. This Pentecostal Christian is trying to pull off Miracle 2.0, and his rhetoric sometimes has an evangelical feel. Here, he saw a parable in the pandemic.
Breaking this fast is, I suppose, a little like what the country is now going through after 2 years of incredibly difficult times as we've come through the pandemic. As we go into this new period with hope, restored by our faith, restored by our community. And I want to thank all the community members here.
This was a politically ecumenical event, attended as well by the former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. His presence a reminder of this coup culture phase of Australian politics, where reporting on camera felt more like triage, a sifting of the wounded and the slain. Scott Morrison has demonstrated his durability, the first Prime Minister since John Howard to serve out a full parliamentary term. Kevin 07 feels like a different political world.
It's Kevin 22. I'm not sure, mate.
Once the seatbelt sign has been switched off, you'll be free to move about the cabin.
There's a magical mystery tour aspect to life on the trail, because you're not told beforehand where you're going to end up. Even in the air, it was destination unknown. But one thing's for sure, Australian suburbia will feature on the itinerary. So too the country's retirement belt. This was a seniors village in a suburb of Geelong. Scott Morrison's campaign style is reminiscent of an enthusiastic Christian camp leader, trying to make sure every activity is a success, trying to make sure his congregation is always happy.
Sometimes you get lucky.
Here he was promising that an extra 50,000 older Australians will have access to the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card if he wins re-election.
He is a very, very intelligent, good man.
Then comes his daily communion with the media. This press conference revealed one of the defining characteristics of the campaign: the negative partisanship, where politicians say why you shouldn't vote for their opponents, rather than emphasising why you should vote for them.
Labor still do not have an economic plan. Now, if you don't have an economic plan, everything else you talk about is just making stuff up. G'day.
Prime Minister, welcome.
His final campaign stop of the day felt more like a tourism ad.
That is magnificent, isn't it?
It is a beautiful coastline. We're very fortunate.
Surfers in the twilight waves. Australian central casting.
It's about 16, 15, goodness.
One of Scott Morrison's great political skills is that he understands the performative requirements of the modern media age. The need to serve up a quote of the day and to illustrate it with pictures. But some would regard that as a weakness as well. The soundbites sometimes sound prefabricated. The photo opportunities seem contrived. It all begs the question, is he a better campaigner than Prime Minister?
Hey kids, how are you going?
While the Liberals serve up an all-you-can-eat buffet for the television cameras, the Labour campaign is more like a starvation diet. This appearance at a food bank in his home suburb of Marrickville, Anthony Albanese's sole photo op ahead of the evening news.
Anthony Albanese's central promise is no one left behind. That's a message that resonates here with those who believe they're serving the forgotten people of the pandemic recovery.
Maybe his minders are trying to shield him from the media. Maybe it's the lingering effects of having COVID. But Albanese has not been as energetic a campaigner as his rival. Even before he came down with COVID, this slimline leader had decided to fight a small target campaign, which may explain why the gaffes and gotcha moments have sometimes loomed larger than they should have.
Is asking a question about your own policy.
Hang on. Order. You get the question, then I'll have the answer.
And is asking a question about one of your own policies that you announced really a gotcha question?
No. Well, let me tell you about what the NDIS is about. It is about we have a signature policy, which is what I said yesterday. A signature policy to put people at the centre of the NDIS.
Did you make the mistake by not knowing the answer?
And one of the ways that we will do, what it's about is providing...
Is a question on your own policy really a gotcha question, Mr Albanese?
You had your opportunity.
And you're not answering the question.
You had your opportunity, and now it's my turn to answer. So just wait.
You have not answered the question.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you.
To some, this is tough and legitimate media scrutiny. To others, a tedious game of trivial pursuit. Voters will make up their own minds.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your work.
I think the public actually wants to hear what Anthony Albanese has got to say, but with the repetition of that, I mean, God, what are they thinking? I'm sure that's not why they went into journalism.
The day ended with a burst of energy from the Indian classical dancers at this Hindu community dinner.
Friends, I have a great love for India.
There are times when Anthony Albanese has seemed to exhibit stage fright during this campaign, viewing the act of electioneering as an examination to endure rather than an experience to enjoy.
The cliché is also a truism. The governments tend to lose elections rather than oppositions winning them. But Anthony Albanese faces the same question at the end of this campaign as he confronted at the start. Has he passed the prime ministerial plausibility test?
Big problems are crowding in on Canberra. Economic instability, an increasingly assertive China, climate change. But this has not been a big ideas campaign. Aside from those high visibility jackets, there's been a noticeable lack of fluorescence.
That story was produced by Raveen Hunjan. We're very close to the home stretch of the election campaign now, and Chief Political Correspondent Laura Tingle's with me. Laura, we're almost into the final week, and that's when the pressure really starts to tell on everyone, politicians, their staff, journalists. But interestingly, the tone seems a bit less febrile, if anything.
Yes, there was a really clear change of tone, I think, that started last night, Lee. After that rather shouty debate on Sunday night, both leaders were being incredibly civilised in the debate on Channel 7 last night. Anthony Albanese was judged the winner, and I think in terms of the content of what he had to say, he was doing much better than the Prime Minister on issues like wages, being able to explain exactly what he was doing. And I think the most interesting point, perhaps, in terms of sort of just telling viewers a little bit about the two men came at the very end of the debate.
What is the one strength that you find in this gentleman that you admire but also worries you?
He's never forgot where he's come from. He's shown the ability to rise to be the leader of one of the oldest parties in this country. But, you know, to do this job, you need to know your stuff.
He was trying there. Yep. Well, the job of Prime Minister is one that is obviously a difficult one to do. Scott's absolutely committed to his nation, and I admire that. And on a range of issues, to name one, mental health. It's a good thing that it's being spoken about. It's a good thing that the Prime Minister speaks about it as well.
There you go. You can be positive.
I had no barbs.
I you wanted one of each when you asked. Right. I must have misunderstood the question.
So, yes, that sort of civilised tone continued on today, Lee, but there's a real change of mood, the sense that Labor definitely is on track for a win, affected the questions that were going to both Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese. And while the PM was facing questions about polls, showing him leading the coalition to a significant loss in just over a week's time, he was facing problems about candidates of various forms. His controversial pursuit of the transgender issue, which has split his party, a candidate who had mistakenly confused her challenger with another Asian Australian, more questions about Education Minister Alan Tudge. So it was just not really all that great for the PM. He was even asked if he was a bit tired at one point in the press conference. By contrast, Anthony Albanese, who was much more confident, I think, by the week's end, was being asked about what it felt like to be on track to win government, which gave him a chance to outline his positive agenda and to criticise the PM for failing to appear on the ABC to date or at the National Press Club next week. And so he basically had this sort of sense within the media pack was much less aggressive to Anthony Albanese than it has been, and much more sort of suddenly going, oh, this guy could be Prime Minister in a week.
Laura, foreign policy has been part of this campaign. China's ambassador to Australia wrote a piece in the Financial Review today. The Port of Darwin was back in the news as well. How are those two stories playing out?
Well, the Chinese ambassadors basically said that Australia shouldn't see China's engagement in the region as a security threat. The PM basically sort of said he didn't agree with that, or he didn't agree with the idea that it was of no consequence, said it was of great consequence. He was also put on the spot over revelations that taxpayers had spent almost $20 million as an incentive for the Northern Territory to sell its Port of Darwin to the Chinese company, which is, of course, a very contentious political and policy point. And by contrast, Anthony Albanese just said, look, he hadn't met the ambassador, hadn't seen the details of the piece, but he talked about how China has changed its posture and is much more aggressive in the region, and we needed competition without catastrophe.
Laura Tingle, thank you very much. And next week, 7:30, we'll dedicate 2 programs to in-depth interviews with both Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese. First up is the Prime Minister on Monday night. Queensland helped deliver the Coalition's 2019 election victory with strong swings against Labor in the regions. 3 years on, the Morrison government's commitment to net zero emissions by 2050 is being publicly questioned by some in the LNP, including the party's candidate in the seat of Flynn. Michael Atkin reports.
The central Queensland seat of Flynn, based around the port city of Gladstone, is home to heavy industries and takes in surrounding farming and coal mining communities.
We need coal-fired power stations for some time yet before and if we transition to an alternative energy source.
With the retirement of sitting Nationals MP Ken O'Dowd, former state member Colin Boyce is the party's candidate to replace him.
I'm a grazier. I'm a farmer. I've lived the better part of my life heavily involved in agriculture, and I'm doing it right now.
And I certainly encourage you to get your message out to the world about how good coal is for our country.
Flynn is one of the regional Queensland seats that swung against Labor in 2019, when protests against the Adani mine became a lightning rod and the Nationals campaigned on a pro-coal platform.
The future for our country can be secured, and what we have done in the past will be built here in central Queensland again. I can't wait.
But this election, Colin Boyce is being asked to sell a very different message: the Coalition's net zero policy on carbon emissions. 7:30 spoke to him in November after he was pre-selected.
I'm not a great believer in the net zero policy per se. Mr Morrison's put forward a plan that's got flexibility, and he will not legislate, he will not demand that people take up particular courses of action, and that is a flexibility that's built into his plan.
2 weeks ago, he made headlines for appearing to question the government's commitment to net zero.
Zero net carbon emissions by 2050, Morrison's document is a flexible plan. It leaves us wiggle room as we proceed into the future.
Yeah, well, the net zero thing is all sort of dead anyway. It's all over.
What our candidate in Flynn was talking about is how we get there. He wasn't talking about the commitment himself, and he's clarified that today. Our commitment to net zero by 2050 is a commitment of the Australian government that I made in Glasgow. It is the government's absolute policy.
Since making those controversial comments, Colin Boyce told 7:30 he was too busy to be interviewed. Mr Voice, Michael Atkin here from ABC 7:30.
Hello.
Do you regret casting doubt on net zero during the height of the election campaign? Could that cost the Liberals seats in Sydney and Melbourne?
Last time the Labor Party wouldn't say coal. I have got a strong record of supporting the coal industry.
Yeah, g'day, it's Matt Burnett here, Labor candidate for the federal seat of Flynn. How you going?
Labor's candidate, Gladstone Mayor Matt Burnett, senses an opportunity.
Biggest issue we're hearing in the community at the moment is access to GPs, but also...
But with a margin of 8.7%, taking the seat won't be easy.
Childcare, aged care, Medicare, they're the big three issues that they want to focus on, and I'm focused on those. So my plan is to win this time around. I want to win on the primary vote.
Labor's challenge is winning back voters who deserted the party in 2019. This area of South Gladstone is considered an ALP stronghold, but the swing against it was 11%, with most of those votes going to minor parties. At Central FC soccer training, the players are competing hard. What are you weighing up?
Basically, yeah, costs of living, that sort of thing, what each group's bringing to the table. In the future, that's going to be a big thing.
At least one is considering switching his vote from the LNP to Labor.
I think I just picked ScoMo because he was sort of that man of the people looking character, you know.
Why are you leaning towards Labor?
I've just seen a lot of advertising about the benefits towards healthcare and, you know, just the Medicare system, everything in general.
I'm still undecided. I have no idea which government will be better.
Salon owner Aman Dillon is worried about a shortage of skilled staff and the rising cost of doing business.
You can get big texture, but we don't make too fine one.
She voted Labor last time, but is leaning towards the Morrison government because of the financial support it provided during the pandemic.
I'm very happy because when COVID started, we were very confused what to do, how long it will be keep going. It was great help. They done a lot for all the business.
Well, we're a Blackwater coal mine here, and as you can see, the job rocks.
Labor candidate Matt Burnett is walking a tightrope, arguing his pro-coal stance can coexist with support for net zero emissions, which he believes will drive growth of new industries like hydrogen.
It is an exciting future. There's jobs to be had.
What about parts of the Labor Party where they think climate change is the biggest issue?
I think there's parts of every party that think climate change is the biggest issue.
One Nation rode a wave of disenchantment here last election, picking up almost 20% of the primary vote. This time, Clive Palmer's United Australia Party is running a highly visible campaign attacking vaccine mandates and the government's net zero policy.
You see Barnaby, like he just rolls over every time. Like when the Liberal Party say something, he rolls over. They say, you know, you've got some great people, even Matt Canavan, but at the end of the day, their leaders still are pushing for net zero.
I'm here at the Boyne Island Tenham Sands Medical Centre.
At a small press event, 7:30 asked Nationals candidate Colin Boyce if he stood by his comments on net zero or if he regretted them.
The Liberal National Government has made a commitment to reach net zero by 2050.
And will you back that in government?
So should I become the member for Flynn, I will be part of a team that has made that commitment. I will be defending the industries and the jobs of the Flynn electorate.
Have you been pulled into line?
I remain a candidate for Flynn, and as I said, if I become part of that team, that is the commitment that the Liberal National Government has made.
Yeah, I just want to...
At the Calliope Central Bowls Club, the candidates are making their pitch over schooners and snacks. Minor party preferences could be crucial to the outcome here. In a blow to Labor, both the UAP and One Nation are preferencing Colin Boyce ahead of Matt Burnett.
This election is centred around national security, economic security and energy security.
There's three big issues
Along with the cost of living, it's aged care, childcare and Medicare, and that's because we care, we will fix all three. Cheers.
Pauline Hanson's One Nation party vowed to field candidates in all 151 lower house seats this election. Some of them are so-called ghost candidates from whom we've not heard. So our intrepid ghost tour operator, Mark Humphreys, went on their trail.
Oh, hello. Come with me on an air-raising journey as I tell you a spine-tingling story about the One Nation party's many ghost candidates from whom no voter has seen nor heard since registration's closed. Behold, the mysterious Richard Thomas running in the seat of New England. This boy's kept a lower profile than that street scribbler Banksy. When questioned about disappearing Dickie, a spokesperson for One Nation was unable to provide any biographical details, other than that he worked in sales. Hear the terrifying tale of Narelle Seymour, the famous invisible lady haunting the seat of Hughes, of whom no one has seen hide nor hair. So untraceable, not even Craig Kelly could text her. The only trace we do have of her is a candidate eligibility form, which scholars are still trying to decode, because according to the news rags, the form contained very little information, apart from a mistyped sentence which read, "Husband is an Australian-born citizen." Sounds like what the Australian Prime Minister might call a loose unit. And if that didn't send a shudder up your democracy sausage, here's something that'll cause even the most teal-coloured voter to turn as white as a sheet. Earlier this year, One Nation pledged to curse every one of the 151 seats in the House of Reps with a candidate. But how many of them are ghosts, sire, you ask? Well, so far the ABC has counted about a dozen. And they say none is more nightmarish than the diabolical double candidate who's accused of running in two different electorates in two different states for two different parties. And it's double toil and trouble for this two-headed beast, as he's been referred to the bobbies at the AFP, with his last reported words being that he was, quote, massively annoyed. But how to explain this phantasmic phenomenon? Well, this ghastly gossip will cover you in goosebumps, but rumour has it that the scarlet-haired leader of One Nation, who haunts the hallowed halls of power, is actually dead.
If you are seeing me now, it means I have been murdered.
Well, what do you make of that?
That's the program for tonight. Thanks for your company. Good night.